This is a true crime discussions channel. We speculate. This is all just speculation. Because it's true crime, it's for mature audiences only. There will be no children allowed, no exceptions. Everything on this channel falls under fair use. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share. It's free. Hello, everybody. It is good to see you. Thank you, Jenny, for saying that. Eek, Pinto, I know you're listening, Pinto, Joy, Serena, and Jenny Jen. Thank you all for being here today. We got several things that I want to talk about today. We're going to start with day 14 and 15 of the Delphi brief. So I will get that pulled up and we will start with that. Hold on, let me get it where you guys can see it, and then I will drop the link if anybody wants to come on panel. This one is from the local news station in that area, and it is called Richard Allen's sister and daughter say he never touched them.
Here on WTHR
Plus. House.
Day 15 of the Delphi murders trial saw the defense team for Richard Allen bring witnesses to discredit the prison confessions that jurors heard last week. In a moment, you'll hear from our legal analyst, Katie Jackson-Lindsay. But first, we want to get right out to Delphi with our senior investigative reporter, Bob Siegel, and Samantha Johnson. So Bob and Samantha, today started off talking about Richard Allen's mental.
Okay, so I have dropped the StreamYard link if anybody wants to come on panel with me to talk about this, and we're going to see where the West Memphis 3 was, where they are today, and we will talk about what the Satanic Panic was.
Mental state, didn't it?
It did. That was really the focus. Want to welcome Samantha joining us on the debrief. You've been covering the trial and all the pretrial hearings from the very beginning. So it's wonderful to have you here with us
Well,
tonight.
happy to be here. And I think especially in these days, as we inch closer to what's expected to be the end of this trial, we're hearing more important information come from the defense team. And that was certainly the case today.
It was. Just to let you know again where we are, we're directly across the street behind us is the Carroll County Courthouse. And inside today, some really important testimony. And like Scott just mentioned, you know, last week we had these jailhouse phone calls from Richard Allen, which were devastating for the jury to hear these confessions in Richard Allen's own voice, saying over and over again that he killed Abby and Libby. That was last week. This week, the defense has been working very hard to turn the page and to help the jury understand why those incriminating statements were made. So we'll talk about that in a moment. First, let's get you up to speed on who the witnesses were for today. On day 15, we started with Dr. Polly Westcott. She is a neuropsychologist, years of experience dealing with inmates. She was the first witness today. Then Max Baker. We've heard from
Jailhouse calls are crazy, Joy. And especially considering what this man was going through, all of the psychosis and things that he was dealing with, and the hate and just a bunch of craziness. I'm trying to get a hold of some jailhouse calls actually, but having issues.
For Max before, he is an intern for the defense team who's been working on this case now for 2 years, basically since Brad Rosie and Andrew Baldwin were assigned to the case. Then we heard from 2 family members of Richard Allen, Jamie Jones, Richard Allen's sister, and Brittany Zapanta, that is Richard Allen's daughter. And it's the first time we've heard from the 2 of them throughout this entire case. We heard from Shelby Hicks. She was at the Monon High Bridge and the trails around there on the afternoon of the murders, and she testified today. Then we heard again from Steve Mullen. I believe it was his 5th or 6th time being called as a witness, this time by the defense again. He is a former Delphi police chief. More importantly, he has been serving as the investigator for the Carroll County Prosecutor's Office.
Hey, Abellis. Hey, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here. I was worried that you weren't going to be able to make it.
In this case. And lastly, Brad Weber, he lives right next to the crime scene. Some fascinating testimony from him today, and we will talk about him in a moment.
Yeah, and what fascinated me about this list of witnesses we heard from today, the first few really documented what Richard Allen's life looked like inside of prison, right? We got a little bit more insight of what that looked like. The next two, though, were his life outside of prison and his life long before we even had this conversation. And then the last two, sort of towards the end of our list here, felt like a little bit of, okay, let's talk about this case on a much broader scale. So we kind of have a little bit different parts of this case, getting to know more of the defense's arguments in this case too. But this morning, you were saying earlier, was perhaps some of the most telling information we've heard yet so far.
I think for the defense, it was probably the most important witness to take the stand so far. So let's talk about Dr. Westcott and her testimony. She started today telling jurors that she met with Richard Allen last year inside prison to conduct a detailed series of psychological exams on him. Based on those exams and reviewing what she said were countless videos and phone calls and prison reports and medical reports and handwriting samples, Dr. Westcott wrote a 127-page report about Richard Allen's mental state. And we want to show you what her conclusions were. She said Richard Allen has a very long history of mental health disorders going back to when he was a child.
What did they say? 122-page report. That should give us a lot of good insight into what he's got going on. The second one says not faking or exaggerating mental health issues, which, like I've said, I don't think when you're down to eating your own feces, I don't think you're going to be faking that.
The doctor referred to him as a fragile egg when he arrived at the Westville Correctional Facility. She said Richard Allen was not faking or exaggerating his mental health issues while incarcerated.
Sarah, that's amazing. That's amazing. That's awesome. I'm really proud of you for that.
And she said that he showed a clear decline in his mental and physical health within, she said, about 4 months of arriving at the prison. Dr. Westcott said Allen showed a significant slowing of his thinking around the time of his confessions. Based on her analysis, she said Richard Allen suffered from major depressive disorder around the time of his confessions. And she said that disorder combined with high levels of stress caused him to suffer psychosis during the time period when he made his incriminating statements. So those conclusions, crucial for the defense, because it really offsets and counters the most damaging evidence that we have heard so far against Richard Allen, again, which were those confessions to his psychologist in prison, to his mother, to his wife, and confessions that the jury heard directly in his own voice. This helps kind of set the scene for the jury about why those incriminating statements were made.
And we've heard during jury selection, we've heard so far in this trial that a lot of these jurors were concerned about hearing some of these things, about seeing some of these things, whether it be photos, videos, audios that we've heard too. And again, this morning, they were shown some pretty, I would use the word, graphic videos from inside that prison.
Yeah, we'll talk about those videos.
That's going to be interesting to see. I wish we could see the videos of what was going on inside that prison. Good afternoon, Paranormal. It's good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Videos in just a second. I want to show you a few of the other specific comments that this neuropsychologist said about Richard Allen, because she testified for well over an hour today. She explained more about that dependent personality disorder. And she said essentially that a person can't function, make decisions, exist on their own when they have this disorder. And she said that Richard Allen in prison had these constant feelings of abandonment and rejection. And in her words, basically fall apart, that he fell apart when his wife and his mother were not physically there.
That's interesting and really devastating because, like Joy said, I'm also concerned that they have the wrong guy and that he's dealing with all of this, even though he shouldn't even be there. Abellis says the sparrows just arrived. I wanted to say hello to you again because I know your volume was messed up. I actually have a female cardinal that the cats got and the kids brought to me this morning. It's in a box right beside me, but it's dragging its back leg. So I'm really hoping that I can get it better. If you want to see it, I put it on my members only community post.
So she talked about that disorder that he was diagnosed with. Again, she referred to him as a fragile egg by the time he even got to the prison, that even before that, he had a long history, and that he was very fragile before he got there, made much worse once he was in prison. A direct quote from her to the jury, no indication of faking or any type of exaggeration. We heard earlier that some of the prison guards and even the warden, and at times even the psychologist inside the prison who saw him almost every day, said at times it seemed that he was really making this stuff up, that he was.
I don't think so at all. Not at all. Rooster, I haven't got Facebook Messenger on my phone, but I'm going to put it on there right now so I can check your messages that you told me you sent me.
Pretending to be crazy. Today, Dr. Westcott said, no, I didn't see that during the time he made these confessions. It was genuine. He wasn't faking. There was not exaggeration there. And then she talked about delirium, which she said at times she clearly saw that he was showing signs of delirium. She said someone who is in that state doesn't know who they are, where they are, the time of day, and specifically, she said they have no accurate perception of the world around them. Mm. And I thought that was a particularly important description because it showed, again, his state of mind, according to this neuropsychologist, his state of mind, no accurate perception of the world around him. That would make it hard for someone to be making accurate statements about what they were saying.
Yeah, and for her to specifically reference Richard Allen's mother and wife, so many of those phone calls that we have heard, that the jurors have heard, have been to his mother and to his wife. So yes, if he is truly dependent on these people, that's certainly played out in the phone calls that we've heard.
A couple of other interesting things here from this psychologist. She actually compared and she has experience in looking at handwriting samples. And she compared a note that Richard Allen wrote to the prison very, very early on during his incarceration in November of 2022, complaining about conditions there. She compared that with a note that he wrote that eventually went to the warden confessing in April of 2023. And she pointed out that there were major differences in the handwriting, that his November 2022 note, there was punctuation, there was sentence structure, that it made, it flowed, and it seemed much more coherent and put together compared to the confession that he wrote out in 2023 that lacked a lot of those things. And she said that shows a serious and significant mental decline.
Good afternoon, Jennifer Ray. The way they tortured him is just insane. And with them talking about comparing the notes, and you can see that, there's no coherent thought, the punctuation's not there, sentence structure, and all of that again would tell me that there's something going on mentally, like they're trying to say the psychosis. And again, you're not going to just eat your own poo to pretend to be crazy. Like, you might try to, but again, you're going to throw up. Like, I could not pretend to eat my own poop. That's not going to happen. It's not, no. Paranormal, I hope that you feel better.
She also, I want to point out that the state pushed back during cross-examination on this witness, and they were critical of the neuropsychologist for not incorporating the confessions of Dr. Walla, who was the prison psychologist who saw him almost every day. and pointed out that Dr. Walla did not determine that there was delirium or psychosis right around the time that he made his confessions. And how did she explain that? And she said, and they also pointed out that she didn't even include his detailed confession to Dr. Walla, where he explained all the things that he did on the day of the murder and how he killed the girls and all those things that were in his confession. And she said that Dr. Walla actually did describe in her notes signs of delirium and psychosis, even though she found that he was not experiencing those things at that time. And she pointed out that Dr. Walla, in her description of what Richard Allen said during the confession to her, that was a narrative, that there were no quotes. And Dr. Westcott said that it's very different getting what looks like a really coherent description of committing these murders from a psychologist versus what he may have actually said on that day to her. And the fact that his speech may not have necessarily been that coherent. And she said on that day, she reviewed video, which showed, in her opinion, that he was really suffering from mental health problems. So very important testimony today from Dr. Westcott. And we know that that is in response to some powerful video.
Powerful video. And like we said a second ago, the jurors had been concerned that they were going to be seeing some of these. We heard that weeks ago during jury selection. But again, you talked about how crucial today was for the defense. This video that the jurors saw, and I know you were in the courtroom, Bob, the courtroom itself did not see some of these videos. It was only meant to play for the jurors, but you heard from a witness who described some pretty graphic detail.
Yeah, today, to support the testimony of Dr. Westcott, jurors got to see two videos that show Richard Allen inside his prison cell. And again, we didn't see those videos. The video screen in the courtroom was angled and turned so only the jury could see it. But we were told by a witness that the video showed Allen eating his own feces and banging his head against the wall of his cell. Some jurors clearly found the videos difficult to watch.
My God, I don't think I could have watched that. Lord have mercy.
I saw one wincing and repeatedly looking away from the video screen. Again, this was an effort by the defense to try to convince the jury that Richard Allen's mental health was so deteriorated in prison that it drove him to make false confessions. And with the jury present, important to point out, prosecutor Nick McLeland, he got into a heated exchange with the defense team. He accused the defense of showing only the very worst images of Allen in prison to try to get sympathy from the jury and to turn Richard Allen into the victim.
Okay, that's bullshit. We shouldn't be saying things like that in court. Jennifer said if they believed he was faking it, why would you administer hardcore medication? I don't know any doctor who would ethically do that. That's right. I agree. Sarah says, I encourage people to imagine themselves in that scenario. If Richard Allen is innocent, little to no criminal record, life gets uprooted. People think you did something horrific. You are isolated. One of the two, right?
The defense countered that by saying that they showed video of Allen inside his prison cell that would show the truth. And
okay, we don't know what the truth is, in my opinion. This man is obviously got some mental issues, and from what it sounds like, he's not faking it. I don't think calling one a lie and one the truth is ethical either. She said to finish the statement, she said one of the two. You are presumed guilty, pre-existing mental health issues, useful to your family, etc. Halidol is strong and old school antipsychotic. Yep. Yeah, those are all really great points. Thank you.
Of course, the video, the two long videos, the compilation of videos that were shown in court today, that comes after Saturday, where the jury got to see 15 different videos that took about 2 hours for them to look at. And again, only the jury got to see that video, but that was showing Richard Allen outside of his cell, showing him being showered, getting a haircut, getting medical treatment, getting tased in one video. some of the jurors showed some signs of concern looking at that video on Saturday. Again, all of this.
Is it ethical to tase a man that's obviously having mental issues? I mean, unless he's like coming at you or being dangerous, I would assume. That's concerning as well. Sarah, you're good.
By the defense to try and show the conditions that Richard Allen was in while he was inside Westville Correctional Facility.
And can I ask how much video today? How long were those videos? Do you remember?
So the videos, again, these were compressed. One of the first video was 5 hours, compressed way down. Brad Rosie, who was walking the jury through these videos, he would, with the judge's permission, fast forward a couple minutes at a time. Clearly, there were certain parts of the video that he really wanted the jury to see. The second video was shorter. That was from a 2-hour time frame. The first one was from a time period in April. I believe the second one was from a time period in May. Again, both time periods that Richard Allen made confessions about the murders of Abby and Libby. So the defense was trying to say, look, the same time that he was making confessions, he was in a deep state of psychosis and not doing well, and wanting the jury to actually see what he looked like, how he was acting during that time. And again, today, specifically during that first video, some of the jurors looked horrified at what they were seeing.
Again, I think it's really important to show his mental state, because you would ask yourself, well, who would confess to a crime they didn't commit? And then, you see these videos and how he was actually acting and what was going on, and hearing from the doctors, and you understand how it's very easy for someone in that mental state to confess to anything. And I mean, hell, he could have confessed to being in an airplane and over Bahama at the moment. Keep in mind that he also confessed to murdering his whole family and killing his grandchildren. So, and he doesn't even have grandchildren. So I think all of this is very pertinent information for the jury to hear.
We were able to see their faces. We weren't able to see the video, but if the defense was trying to make an impact on this jury today, I think they did that.
And keep in mind, this was all in the first few hours on a Monday morning, right?
Yes.
Back from the Sunday break, back in court this morning. And this was a lot to break down. It was a lot to process. It was a lot for the defense to talk about. It was a lot for these jurors to take in too. So I think now's a good time, Scott, to kind of talk this over with our legal expert, to kind of break down what all of this means for us going forward.
All right, very good. We'll do just that. Thank you so much, Sam. We'll get back to you and Bob in a moment. Katie Jackson-Lindsay is a former deputy prosecutor, a criminal defense attorney. She's been with us every day of this trial, breaking things down. So let's talk about.
Sarah says, everything I've seen from a logical perspective with some psychology education, the mental health aspect should help him, but not everyone has that perspective. And that's a great point. Paranormal, I try to be patient too. I have 4 bonus children that have ADHD, among other things. And I try so hard. I find myself praying throughout the day for patience. So I'm not very patient either, but you'll get there. I will too.
About Dr. Polly Westcott, the psychologist who detailed in this 127-page report this long history after examining Richard Allen, that he had a long history of mental health disorder. He called him a fragile egg, not faking his mental health issues. This is much different testimony than what we heard from Dr. Walla last.
At Vistaprint, we print the best invitations at 50% off, so all our invites start at under $1, because your wedding should have more celebrating and less spending.
Last week.
That's so impactful, and it's so significant, because this is the first time in the trial that we heard a fact presented by the state, or a set of facts, and it has been directly refuted with completely contradictory evidence by the defense. And so this is that scenario where the jury is advised in jury instructions that they're going to hear from witnesses, and it's their responsibility to judge the credibility of these witnesses. They can decide what to believe, what not to believe. They can decide to believe part of a witness's testimony, some of it, or all of it, or none of it, right? And so this is a scenario where they have to put that to the test because they now have completely conflicting testimony, and they're going to have to judge the credibility of the state's expert on these particular facts versus the defense's expert. So this is a big point in this trial.
All right, so let me ask you, the jury obviously wincing and having reactions to seeing this video that our reporters were unable to see because, again, they turned the TV toward the jury, so only the jury could see it. What impact is this having on the jurors to see these videos, to see what Richard Allen's state of mind is, to see him physically in his jail cell after hearing the...
Okay, Sarah, thank you. I'm okay, Abylis. I just get stressed out and have to step away for a minute sometimes, but I just say that to reiterate that we all have to practice patience, and it's a hard skill to learn.
Testimony from Dr. Westcott.
Well, it could have a range of impacts. So it's obviously causing some sort of physical reaction because we heard what Sam and Bob described. One would hope that it's having the intended impact of looking at these alleged confessions, not in a capsule, but in their complete environment in which they were made. You know, the defense has alleged all along that he was suffering from significant mental health issues, that there were delusions, and the state has put witnesses on that's completely said that's not true. And so now the jury has an opportunity to not just hear these confessions, but they've had an opportunity to see the full context in which they were made, which is important. And in fact, it's so important that I believe this is evidence that should have come from the state, because the state should have wanted the jury to see the full picture of how these alleged confessions were made. And so
that's important that this woman who was a defense attorney is pointing that out, because again, I question a lot of the evidence not being able to be submitted in this case because the state is not allowing the jury to see the full picture. And the fact that the defense had to bring it up, I mean, I could understand the tactic, but is it ethical would be my question.
So you have the intended impact of now they can understand a little bit better in context why Richard Allen may have been saying such things if they weren't true. But there's also just that normal human reaction. So this is similar to the jury looking at those crime scene photos. One of the jurors in particular, we saw in the notes from today, one of the jurors that had a significant emotional reaction that was obvious to people in the gallery was the same juror that had a significant emotional reaction to those crime scene photos.
Let's remind our viewers about Richard Allen. He's presumed innocent. He is in a prison with convicted felons, right? Mm-hmm. And he's on suicide watch. Mm-hmm. The lights are on constantly. He's hearing comments from other offenders that are in the prison. So can you describe, what to our viewers, the kind of conditions that were there when Richard Allen was being held waiting for his trial?
Well, what we've learned about those conditions is that those are conditions that are unacceptable even for a convicted person. We've heard evidence such as he was competing with cockroaches and ants for his food. The lights were on 24/7. He was being threatened. He was being watched 24/7. He didn't always have running water.
Right.
He was made to sit in his own feces. That's not even acceptable conditions for someone who has been convicted of a crime. And so it has really put a spotlight on prison conditions in that prison. But another thing that's really significant.
That is a great point. It is not acceptable for somebody who has even been convicted of a crime. It's not acceptable for anybody. Somebody needs to go in and do something about that.
Is that under normal circumstances, a jury wouldn't even be allowed to know that a person was in jail awaiting trial. That's why defendants wear plain clothes to court. That's why they don't wear jail uniforms, because there's studies that show that does something to the psychology of the jury in determining guilt or innocence. And so this is significant in that regard as well, because the issue of Richard Allen being detained pre-trial has only come into play and into the purview.
Good morning, Chill Chaser. Yeah, good job, Indiana. Eek, they do keep the lights on 24/7 because they have to see what you're doing in your cell. They do turn them down at like nighttime hours, but you basically have to learn how to sleep with the lights on. That is something that they do, but like allowing him to sit in his own feces and eat his own feces and eat cockroaches and all that is just too much. Jennifer said, if I was on the jury, I would have to throw out the confessions and focus on evidence, which is non-existent. A questionable bullet. Witnesses didn't even identify him in court. Right. And there's no DNA evidence at all whatsoever.
View of this jury because of these alleged confessions.
So at the end of the day, before we get it back out to Sam and Bob, at the end of the day, these jurors are having to decide which psychologist that has been monitoring Richard Allen in jail do they believe, right?
Exactly. So they're going to have to weigh the credibility of each of those people. We know that each time each of those witnesses were put on the stand, you heard a bunch of information about their experience, and we learned about, their full resume and all the training that they've had. And so now the jury has to compare those one to the other, and even make some credibility calls based on other things that they might not normally have to consider. For example, the doctor from the Department of Correction no longer works there.
Dr. Walla,
right. And there's a mystery surrounding that because the state objected to the defense going into that, versus you have this reputable Dr. Westcott who testified that she has testified for prosecutors and for defense attorneys.
Right.
So I would think that would give her a little more credibility in that regard. So it's a tough job, but they've been instructed on how to go about doing it. And it's clear to me that they're keeping an open mind based on their questions.
All right, let's get back to Bob and Sam now, because two of the other witnesses that we heard from today, that the jury heard from, two family members of Richard.
Right, Abellis?
Allen, right?
Oh, we got a commercial.
The pineal gland.
Hold on just a minute. Yeah, the conditions in this prison are completely unacceptable. Even Eek was like, I'm pretty sure that even war criminals can't be subjected to that kind of treatment, and I don't think they can.
Yeah, that's right. We had his sister and his daughter today. This was the first time we had heard from them. So again, really impactful testimony coming from Richard Allen's attorneys today and their defense team. I do want to start with his sister, Jamie Jones. I think we have some video we can play for you here of the two walking into the courthouse today. Jamie, the sister, is in the orange sweater, the orange cardigan you see here, and his daughter, Brittany, is just behind her in the gray long sleeve shirt. So let me start with Jamie today, his sister. She told us in court today that Richard Allen is about 5 years older, so she's the younger sister. She said they lived together growing up as they were children. And the defense was very straightforward and honest today. The defense...
Shaboogies, I was just thinking the same thing. That is clearly pink. That is not orange. That is pink. Ma'am, stop it.
As they were questioning, Jamie said, let's just get right to it. And she asked the following questions. I'm going to put them up here on your screen. She said, did Richard Allen ever molest you? In which Jamie responded, no, he did not. They asked again, did Richard Allen ever touch you? In which Jamie responded, no, he did not. The defense asked her at the end of that questioning, do you love him? Do you love your brother, Richard Allen? In which she said yes. Next up, immediately after that, we heard from Richard Allen's daughter, Brittany. She came up on the stand. She said, Richard Allen is my father. She said she lived at home, of course, growing up as a teenager until she went to school years later. And it was similar line of questioning that we heard from the defense to his sister and his daughter. Similar questions, including, did your father ever molest you? In which she said no. Do you love your father? Of course, she said yes. The defense asked her, would you lie for him? She said no. Seemed pretty straightforward answers, again, directly from Richard Allen's family. But then there was some more questioning. And they brought up photos. This was the state brought.
So why they're asking, in my opinion, allegedly speculating, why they're asking about molestation, even though that these girls were not molested, would be number one, because he said in that supposed confession where he was obviously psychotic that he was going to molest them, but then that man's van drove by and he was unable to complete the act. If this man really was capable of something like that, there would have been signs early in life with his little sister, or his daughter. And it also goes to the mental state of him. Like, you don't commit a crime like that unless you have shown some signs of doing some things like that in the past. And I think that's what they're trying to point out. Shabugi said, "Oh my God, did you hear about WTHR, which is this channel, reporting the daughter said no to Do You Love Him before retracting?" I did not. They didn't hear, which is good. So I'm glad we got it after they made that correction.
Brought up photos of Richard Allen, they say, from before the girls went missing, before February 2017. And they asked, is this a fair representation of what your dad looked like at the time? What about this one? What about this one? What about this one? And she said, well, yeah. But the defense said, do you know when these were taken? What about this one? Do you know when this one was taken? And she couldn't really.
Thank you, Built to Spill, and welcome. Thank you for being here. Built to Spill says one of his confessions said he did molest them is why. So Built to Spill jumped in to tell us why they're asking that as well. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Thank you for being here.
Didn't really say, right? These were from years ago. But again, the state said, is this a fair representation of what your father looked like at the time the girls went missing? To which she nodded.
Yes.
I think there was a little confusion. She was like, well, yeah, that's what my dad looked like. But again, I don't know when those photos were taken.
Right. And let's talk about why, specifically, why those questions about, did your brother ever molest you? And that ties in directly to the testimony that Dr. Walla gave about the confession that Richard Allen made to her while in prison. And
okay, so here we go with what Built to Spill was just telling us.
During that confession, or some of the statements that he had made to Dr. Walla, he had talked about the fact that he had molested some of his family members and mentioned names of some of his family members. And, oh, I'm so sorry that, I molested this person, I molested that person. So hearing his daughter and hearing his sister specifically say, no, that never happened. Again, that ties into the testimony that we heard from Dr. Westcott today, saying that during this time, he would have made statements that very well may have been just detached from reality. And so by calling Richard Allen's daughter and sister to say, no, those things didn't happen, that were part of the things that he confessed to while in prison, it kind of underscores the point that he was saying things at that time that didn't actually happen.
Yeah, and one of the biggest things I was watching for was the demeanor between the two, right? Yeah. When we saw Richard Allen sitting at the defense table and then his own daughter take the stand in his defense, I was really curious what that would look like. I only saw them interact once. We did see Brittany, his daughter, was visibly emotional at times. She was tearing up. It looked like she was trying to avoid eye contact with some of the folks in the courtroom. But I only noticed them address each other once. I noticed Richard Allen kind of nod at her. She kind of gave him a half smile and immediately teared up. That was the only time I witnessed an exchange between those two.
That's all that I saw too. And notable, and not sure what necessarily to make of it, but his daughter has not been in court since the kind of the very beginning. And she does have a young child. She's expecting another. So obviously.
So again, allegedly speculating, I would think that she's having issues seeing her dad in the mental state that he is in, and she don't want to see that. So she made eye contact and smiled, but she doesn't. The mental state that he is in is hurting her, and she doesn't want to see him like that. So she kind of stays away for now until they can get the trial taken care of, and hopefully, go from there.
Obviously, this whole trial and all these proceedings would put an incredible amount of stress on her, which could easily. So we're not going to look into the fact that she wasn't there. Another thing to point out that we may not have mentioned so far is Kathy Allen, Richard's wife, and his mother. They have missed a fair amount of testimony over the last few days. The explanation for his mom not being there last Saturday, so actually about a week ago, she fell and tripped on her way going into the Carroll County Courthouse and she actually broke her nose. So she's been home recovering from that. And Kathy Allen has not wanted to be in court for some of the really challenging testimony. She was in court to listen to some of the phone calls, the confessions. As far as seeing the video of her husband in prison, she has chosen not to be there to see that video.
Yeah, and one other thing I think is important to mention before we move on to our next witness, the jurors in this trial have asked really great questions.
Fabulous questions.
They've been very involved from what we can tell. They've asked a lot of questions. And one of the jurors asked an interesting question of Brittany, his daughter. The juror wrote, "Do you visit the High Bridge? Did you visit the High Bridge in your teens?"
Are you sure these people want to?
Yeah, that would be devastating. I mean, just put yourself in the situation and knowing that your dad or your husband is going through this in the mental state that they're in. And then, you want to support them in court, but it's hard to see them like that. I think it'd be hard for anybody.
During cross-examination, the state then asked, "Okay, did you go to the High Bridge with your?" She said yes. They asked another question. They said, "Were you scared when you went and visited the High Bridge with your father?" She said, "Of the bridge, yes," meaning scared of the bridge, yes. They kind of danced around that topic a couple times. She ended up saying that she had gone to the bridge with her father maybe once or twice, in her words, as she was a teenager. But growing up here in Delphi, we understand that's a common occurrence and that's what kids do. And so she said, yeah, of course I've been there. But just an interesting.
I thought it was interesting also. I thought it was a great question from the juror. And by the way, juror sitting in seat number 5, man, if there's an opportunity to be able to ask questions, she's asking.
Yeah.
I mean, she is just sending those questions to the judge to ask the jurors on almost every witness. She's a very inquisitive, curious juror, and she's had some really good questions. I thought it was a really good follow-up question by Deputy Prosecutor Jim Luttrell, who not only then, after saying, "Did you visit the High Bridge in your teens?" he specifically said, "Did you go there with your father?" Getting her to say, "Yeah, we used to go there," perhaps establishing the fact that Richard Allen is very comfortable and familiar with going out onto that bridge, which a lot of people have described as super scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's move on to our next witness. It was Shelby Hicks, and we probably don't have to chat about her for very long. I didn't think her testimony was particularly memorable. She and her boyfriend were on the Monon High Bridge.
Paranormal said it's sad that this man and his family's lives have been destroyed because the authorities are incapable of admitting they are wrong. Their egos won't allow them to. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that they needed a fall guy because election was coming, and so they did. They made him the fall guy.
Sounds like just before the time that the murders happened. And
Jennifer Ray says not to mention his family is just as vilified as Richard Allen, which is right on point.
She explained to the jury what she saw. She got a bunch of questions from the defense. She got a fair number of questions on cross-examination too. I didn't necessarily see anything huge that came away from that testimony that hasn't already been discussed by other folks who've provided testimony to the jury.
I would agree. And I was surprised by that because, like you mentioned, this was much longer than what we heard from Richard Allen's own family even. It took a lot more time. But again, she said, "My boyfriend and I were there that day. It was a beautiful day. We were there for less than 30 minutes is what they decided today in court." And she said, we saw some people out and about. The next day, once we heard the news of what had happened, we decided to go to police and at least just share what we saw while we were out there.
Chill says, should have asked the daughter if she considered her dad buff in 2017 and if he was taller than he is today. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from with that. The height of Bridge Guy is debatable because there is like a dip, so we can't really tell how tall he is. I wish that we could though, because that would tell us a lot because Richard Allen is so short.
She said, "We talked to police twice and we haven't heard from them since." So I was almost waiting for more to come out of that.
Yeah.
But that was kind of the extent of that.
Someone else who was at the scene that day. Not exactly clear what the defense was trying to get to by putting Shelby Hicks on the stand, but that was her testimony. And then really tense interaction between the defense and Steve Mullen back on the stand again, one of the main investigators in this entire case for the prosecutor. And that exchange was really testy between Andrew Baldwin and Steve Mullen.
Yeah, you can tell that Investigator Mullen had been on the stand before and knows his stuff, right? Andrew Baldwin would ask a question, or the defense would ask a question, and he would say, is there a question there? You know, what's the point? What are we getting at here? So very much holding his ground, but a lot of the focus here was talking about the vehicles of this case. Talk to me about that.
Yes. So earlier, and again, this all originated from a question from the jury asking, do we know how many of these 2014 Ford Focus hatchbacks were in the area of Delphi, were registered by the state? Again, that's the type of car that Richard Allen has, that he said that he was driving, and that investigators told the jury that they think they see driving along a road just north of the crime scene, right around the time of the crime scene, or I should say just before, kind of putting him in that location. And the jury had asked, how many of these types of cars are there in the area? Would it be unusual that you would have a Ford Focus 2014 hatchback in that area? So it was a few days later that Steve Mullen came back to give the jury an answer to that. And he said it was a relatively small number of vehicles that fit that description. Well, today, Andrew Baldwin really took him to task for that, said that he was selectively presenting information to the jury, because it kind of came out today in Steve Mullen's testimony that he very selectively chose a very small number of hatchback models for the 2014 Ford Focus, when in fact, there are actually many more models of that hatchback that would look similar to what Richard Allen was driving that day.
That is interesting. Why are you not, again, putting all the information out there, which is not unusual because they've been leaving information out this entire case, but why would you not compare all the vehicles and see if you've got somebody that's got a criminal record and done some sexual molestation or anything like that, that maybe already came in and said some questionable things? I mean, that could be your guy, but you're not even trying to look for them.
And so he was really trying to impeach the witness and suggest that you're not telling the jury the whole story here. You picked and chose what information you presented to them, and there's actually a much larger pool of vehicles in the 5-county area right around Delphi that you should have told them that you did.
Well, in fact, he even asked, Andrew Baldwin specifically asked, don't you think it would be important for the jury to see similar models? Looking back, don't you think this would be important? To which he responded, it would be, yes. So again, it kind of caught him in one of these moments of, was there more that could have been done here?
Right. And then there was the part about the log of missing interviews, and he was trying to essentially catch Steve Mullen in a lie to the jury there. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, this kind of goes back to testimony that was made back in March of this year from this investigator. Andrew Baldwin brought up missing evidence again today. And he said, was there a log created of these missing interviews, or even interviews without sound that were allegedly captured? And he said, yeah, there were. We tried to document all that. And then they said,
Paranormal said, so I may be behind in the video, but the authorities never sent the bridge guy video to NASA or any other outside source because of the cost and the probability of getting the height wrong. There's a lot of things. There was 72 hairs found at the crime scene they never sent off. And again, I mean, I have to question why. Why are you not going down every single avenue to make sure you have the correct person? It's devastating, really.
He said, well, hang on. That's not what you told us a few months ago. Again, trying to backtrack on what's actually the case here. And then so Andrew Baldwin specifically asked, so was there a log or not? And he said, no, I'm sorry, Andrew Baldwin said, so there is no log. And Mullen said, no, that's not correct. He said, I may have said that at one point, but I've learned more information since then. Again, it was this back and forth and kind of a heated exchange between this investigator and the defense.
And then he followed up with that because there were certain interviews that very early on in the days right after the investigation started, when the girls' bodies were found, some interviews that were done with what the defense says were some possible key suspects that ended up, according to the state, being accidentally erased. And there were some interviews that were erased, and then there were other interviews that just didn't have the audio, or the audio was missing on them. And he followed up, Andrew Baldwin followed up with Investigator Mullen to say, well, what about, you had told us that you had also cataloged and logged all the interviews that had missing audio. And you told us that you had done that, but did you?
Kamala backed Biden on everything. She supported his disastrous economic agenda.
No, I don't like to. I hate that they're doing political ads right now. It's frustrating.
Does that actually exist? And Steve Mullen basically said, no, we didn't, which was different than his testimony previously. So again, trying to undercut the credibility of that witness who presented some important testimony earlier in the trial to the jury.
And then there was this topic about the van. Right?
Yes.
We've heard about this van before. It was brought up, was it last week?
Yes.
In some of Richard Allen's talks about how there was a van that scared him at the crime scene, during one of these alleged confessions in prison. That van was brought up again today.
Yeah, it was. And the state says that Richard Allen confessing to Dr. Walla and including in his confession to Dr. Wall about that van, that's the first time that anyone had ever heard about this van. And that's the one piece that basically ties Richard Allen to knowing information that no one else would know, that was never released before. Well, today, Andrew Baldwin asked Steve Mullen, hey, did you ever see online on Reddit and on all these chat forums lots of discussion about a white van out there? And we know that Dr. Walla admitted she's a huge true crime fan. She said that she followed these podcasts and followed these Reddit chains, and that she had seen and been following the case for years, even before Richard Allen came to become one of her patients. And he asked Steve Mullen, you don't really know what Dr. Walla may have talked to Richard Allen about before those confessions. Maybe she had talked about this white van that she might have read about.
That's interesting, because that was the one thing that made me question everything, seeing this white van. And I was like, maybe if he was going out there and walking on a weekly, even just a weekly basis or a daily basis and counting his steps, maybe he had seen the van go through there at that time. But if we keep in mind this lady and all of the research and, things she was doing into the case at the time with the YouTubers and all that, and they talked about a white van, then, there's the reason why he could have mentioned the white van. Like they're saying, if she asked him, did you see a white van? Is that why you didn't do this? Again, leading your witness or the person you think is guilty, your prisoner.
Out online, and that he might have learned about the van that way. And Steve Mullen acknowledged, no, he did not know everything that Dr. Walla had discussed with Richard Allen. So that kind of throws that piece of testimony by Dr. Walla and that contention by the state that this proves that he wouldn't possibly, know about this unless he were the killer.
Please remember to hit the like button. If you guys hit the like button, it helps us get out into the algorithm and more people can come hang out with us. Dr. Walla is about as unprofessional as it gets. And the damage they have done is irreversible, Rooster. I agree.
that throws that piece a little bit into question.
Yeah, and Andrew Baldwin asked too. He said, so you're telling me you never heard or saw any social media posts or discussions talking about this white van between 2017 and 2022, to which he pretty much answered no. And then Andrew Baldwin said, well, will you be surprised if I tell you there are dozens? What about the complaint about the white van that did this? What about the complaint about a white van here? At this point, the state, right, starts interjecting, starts getting involved. But again, going back to that conversation of was there more that could have or should have been done at that time?
Yeah. So Scott, today, again, really the defense trying to undermine the credibility of testimony that has come before from the state, from their psychologists, from their investigators. The defense is trying to be very deliberate about going after some of that testimony.
All right, Bob and Sam, we'll get back to you in just a moment. Let's bring Katie back into the conversation and ask you about Steve Mullen, this former Delphi police chief, who's now this investigator for the Carroll County prosecutor. He's been on the witness stand a few times in this case. What is the jury to make of a repeat witness coming back in?
Well, if he's coming back in as a state's witness, there's not always a lot to make of that because they may need to recall him a couple of times to lay evidentiary foundations. But now that he's come twice as a defense witness, I said previously, it wasn't a good look for him to ever be called by the defense. Now he's been called twice and he has been confronted with inconsistent statements. And again, we have to remember, he was the police.
Hello, Ed Edwards Cyphers. It's good to see you. Yes, we are going to talk about satanic panic. I don't know how much I will be able to go into it today, but we are going to talk about what it was. And I do want to talk about a preschool that was accused of some satanic panic stuff, if I have time. We're going to touch on it today and at least learn what the satanic panic was and then go more into some satanic panic stories. But that goes back to the West Memphis 3 stories we've been looking into as well. Thank you for being here, Ed Edwards Cyphers.
Police chief. So he was a lead investigator on this case. So to think that he's concealing things from the jury that has to be brought out by the defense, and then to learn that he's making inconsistent statements, that is just not good for the state in any way.
Right. Let's also talk about the jurors asking the question of the 2 family members of Richard Allen. So we've heard from Bob and Sam that both Richard Allen's sister and Richard Allen's daughter were witnesses today. What do you make about the jurors asking the question, hey, have you ever been to the High Bridge before with your father? Why do you think the jurors were interested in learning that?
Well, I think we have to assume that they wanted to understand more about Richard Allen's familiarity with the bridge. We've heard a lot of testimony about how this is sort of a rite of passage for people in the community. And I think it's probably exactly what Bob and Sam said. They were trying to get an idea for how comfortable he was with the bridge, how comfortable he was with that whole area and how familiar with it he was.
Okay, what do you make about the line of questioning from the defense asking about, did Richard Allen ever touch you? Did he ever molest you? Do you still love him? Would you ever lie for him? What do you make of that line of questioning?
I think this was masterful trial strategy for a couple of reasons. So first, we have to look at their line of questioning of Dr. Westcott about Richard Allen making false statements. If you recall, we got some notes about how when she was cross-examined about how did you determine he was making false statements, she said, well, for starters, he said the devil committed these crimes, and that's not true, right? And so the jury is left with that evidence. And
that goes back to satanic panic that I was just talking about.
Then the defense, right after that, puts on the first family member that he said he allegedly molested, which was his sister. And she gets on the stand and says, well, that's not true. And then you hear from his daughter who gets on the stand and says, well, that wasn't true. And so this was really masterful strategically because the defense very much could have said the jury should not be able to hear that Richard Allen confessed to molestation.
Right.
That's another crime, and that's prohibited by the rules of evidence. But as a matter of strategy, they let that information in. And that could have been really bad for Richard Allen, for this jury to hear him say that he's a child molester.
Right.
But they knew that strategically that was powerful, because they knew that they were able to refute that and to say it just wasn't true. So to now put these witnesses on the stand to say, this is nonsensical, these things never happened, it completely highlights their position that he was just making things up that simply were not true.
Okay. So now I want to go back to Bob and Sam, because we were talking on Friday about.
I'm really glad that they thought about that strategically. Like, yeah, go ahead and let them say that so we can refute it later on. Because it's important, and it lays out the whole basis of the psychosis he was experiencing when he made those alleged false confessions.
About this neighbor who lives down near this crime scene, near the bridge. And this is a man that is back on the witness stand. Tell us about this Brad Weber that testified today.
See you tomorrow, Jenna. Bye.
Okay. You ain't seeing me tomorrow, but okay. Hold on just a minute.
Yeah, that's right. Brad Weber lives at a property that's right next to this crime scene, essentially. In fact, today in court, he told the jury that one of the driveways to his property runs right underneath the Monon High Bridge. So his property is right there. And what was so important about today was the fact that the defense got him to admit that he had told differing stories about what he did that day, the day the girls went missing, after work. At one point, he said he went straight home for work, which would have put him there at the time the girls went missing. And then another time, he said that, no, I didn't go straight home. I went and worked on a side job, then went home later in the day. Two different stories, of course, from this man, Brad Weber.
And nobody ever looked into this man. And he also had a Sig Sauer that could not be excluded from having possibly caused the bullet.
Again, why that's important, the timing of this case, and the white van comes up again, because if he did go home straight from work, then that puts him there at the time the girls went missing.
Yeah, let's talk about that timeline a little bit. And this is, again, a witness that the state called to talk about the timeline that they're trying to show. To backtrack a little bit again, Richard Allen, in his confessions to Dr. Walla, one of the things that he mentioned is he told the girls to go down the hill, and then he planned to sexually assault them, but he didn't follow through with that because he saw a van that scared him and changed his plans. And the state called Brad Weber. They put together this timeline to tell.
Good afternoon, Zio. Thank you for being here. It's good to see you today. Shaboogie says that he had a tree branch in his garage like a few days later, laughing my arse off. He dressed up for court, says Chill Chaser.
To tell the jury that we think that van that scared Richard Allen, again,
right,
crucial piece of information that only the killer would know, that the person in that van was Brad Weber. So let's put up the timeline here of what we know happened that day that the state laid out. At 2:02, Brad Weber said that he clocked out at the Subaru plant in Lafayette. And at 2:13, Libby recorded Bridge Guy on the Monon High Bridge. And then at 2:32, Libby's phone data from the Apple Health app on her phone shows that the phone stopped moving. So they believe right around there or before 2:32 is when the murders happened. And then to backtrack a little bit, they say that it was about 25 or so minutes for Brad Weber to get home, so that if he went straight home, 2:27 to 2:30 would be the time that he returned home, said he was driving his van that day. And that could certainly corroborate, potentially, the story that Richard Allen told, that if there was a van on that access road, and that access road is the driveway leading to Brad Weber's home, that could help corroborate their story. But like Sam just mentioned, the defense pulled up two interviews from right after the murders took place. And Brad Weber said today he talked to police almost.
So, hello, U.S. Liberation. Thank you for being here. U.S. Liberation says they should have searched Allen's house 7 years ago, obviously. But as it is, they shouldn't have arrested him knowing they needed way more evidence. I agree very much. I wanted to point out about this timeline we just heard about. Now, obviously, this man's not just going to pull up and within 2 minutes be on the bridge and doing whatever with these girls, unless he had been previously communicating with them on the phone, through text messages, through Instagram, or whatever. So I want to know if they pulled this man's phone records, Brad Weber's, because if he was communicating with them through text messages or some kind of messaging app, that would explain to me why he could maybe immediately go up there to where they were at and could have possibly committed the crime. I want to know what his phone record said, and I want to know if they pulled it. Because otherwise it wouldn't make sense that, within 2 minutes he's up there with them and her phone is not moving. You know what I mean?
Constantly, after these murders happened, they stopped him, they searched his car, they did a search warrant on his home, they checked and did a search warrant on his gun that he had at his home. What they focused in on was on February 17th of 2017, which would be 3 days after the girls' bodies were found. He told some officers that he went straight home that day. But 2 days after that, when he was interviewed by an FBI agent, he told that agent that he did not go straight home that day, that he checked ATM machines and then went home. And Brad Weber explained to the jury today that he owns, back at the time, he owned about 35 ATM machines. He was responsible for making sure that the machines had enough money in them and that they had paper to print out receipts.
I'm sorry that was skipping. I don't know why it does that sometimes. I think it's the video itself, not me.
So, again, the defense today trying to impeach this witness, trying to show difference in his story that would call into question whether or not this time frame really fit what the state is trying to say fits the narrative of the murders.
And again, the jurors asking really important, detailed questions. Another one asking this time, is it typical for you to go home after you would clock out at Subaru, go home, then go out and check on these ATM machines? And he said, no.
He said, no, it's not, which was, again, a great question by the jury and could cause the jury to have some doubt about whether or not Brad Weber's story is correct and whether or not this theory that is laid out by the state is correct as well.
It's not normal for you to check ATM machines, but on that day you supposedly did. Chill Chaser says unless there's zero evidence of when he was actually clocked out, which is accurate. I know even in construction, like where my husband works, they have a clock in and clock out clock. And I mean, and definitely in a Subaru factory, you're going to have one. Did anybody check?
There's a lot to get to. And there was a lot to break down today. Tomorrow is election day.
Yes.
But this judge has been very adamant that we're going to wrap up this trial in her allotted time. So we'll be in court tomorrow. We are expecting another full day, especially as we near the end of the defense's arguments here.
Day 16 coming up tomorrow. And we think that there could be just a couple more days of testimony before this could go to the jury, before they get closing arguments and instructions and then start deliberating and come through with a verdict. So lot to report here on day 15. Scott and Katie, we will send it back to you. And as we have been every day of this trial, back in court again tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow night.
All right, Bob and Samantha doing an excellent job. Again, cameras are not allowed.
Okay. So that was the update on Richard Allen. Tomorrow, of course, we will do whatever they say from today. So we're going to check on the West Memphis 3 now. This is obviously Damian Eccles talking about the new evidence. This is from 6 months ago. That one's 10 years ago. This is a year ago. So we'll look at this real quick. This is from THB 11. And it says the West Memphis 30 years later.
The richest person in the world. You've started 3 of the biggest companies.
So this is going to be 30 years later, which was about a year ago, 2023. And we will see what they have been up to. and then we'll see the new evidence. I'm going to mute that. So it's just showing us pictures of them back when everything happened and they were put into prison.
1993, a time when kids rode their bikes everywhere and many parents didn't worry the way they do now. But in one day, that all changed for a small, tight-knit Arkansas town. The infamous West Memphis murders rocked the world, not just of West Memphis, but our entire state.
Shaboogie said, interesting that they didn't mention they ended the questioning with Weber by showing the tree branch in the photograph of his garage taken on the 19th. Wow, I didn't know that. Thank you for letting me know.
3 second-grade boys disappeared, later found dead in a ditch. They were Stevie, Christopher, and Michael. Their families heartbroken, a town left in fear. And the arrests of 3 teenagers that came soon after kept the story in headlines even to this day. Tonight, we look back at what happened, what's changed following the initial investigation, and why many see the fight for justice continuing 30 years later.
I believe with all my heart and all my soul that the day is coming whenever we will see justice and we'll walk out of this place. It may not come tomorrow. It may not come on September 30th, but it will come.
That was 13 years ago. Damian Eccles was on death row. Jason Baldwin and Jesse Miskelly serving life in prison for the deaths of 3 West Memphis boys.
Get them out of the way of the van!
From the beginning, the trio maintained their innocence. Lonnie Sowery, a member of Damian's legal team, recounts the initial trial.
There was no evidence, absolutely no evidence linking them to the crime. These kids didn't drive. The 3 bodies, bizarrely, had no blood around them. So clearly they were taken from the murder scene to this drainage ditch. Damian lived 8 miles away from where the bodies were buried, never drove. None of these kids drove. They didn't have cars. It was an incredible miscarriage of justice.
It was the morning of May 5th, 1993.
Again, we're looking at what happened to the 3 teenagers that, in my opinion, were wrongly convicted of this murder. But I do want us to remember the 3 little boys that were murdered that day, and say a prayer for their families.
When 3 8-year-old boys, Steve, Michael, and Christopher, went to school. Testimony from neighbors say they were seen playing with each other into the evening. Steve Branch's stepfather called them to come in for the night. That was the last moment of what was a normal day for the little town. The boys never came home. Police searched for them throughout the night and into the next day. The search ended when their bodies were found in a nearby ditch.
The 3 boys were found submerged in water, and it is not an accident. They did not slip off in it. We do have 3 homicide victims.
The community shocked that something like this could happen.
It scares me that people could be that mean and kill kids just like that.
I can't even see. How can somebody?
Sarah says Damian has got a great voice to listen to. He reads his audiobook Life After Death on Audible. And yeah, he does have a good voice. If you guys want to check that out, he did write a book. I think you said he wrote 2 books with his current wife. We think she's
would do something like that because, for a fact, I feel like if it was my kid, I'd kill him. He'll be dead right now.
They was in my room. We decorated their desk pretty for them.
Was that sad?
I was crying. My friend was crying too.
Were they friends of yours?
Steve helped me with my homework.
It wasn't long before police pinpointed their suspects. 3 local teens known to law enforcement for petty crimes. Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly.
They went around and Damian Eccles was a local kid who had some minor trouble, was dressed in black, and they targeted him. And one of the youth officers who had some run-ins with Damian at the crime scene declared this must be the work of Damian Eccles.
The 3 were found guilty of the murders. Miskelly and Baldwin were sentenced to life in prison. Eccles would be sent to death row. It was behind bars where they would spend the next 18 years and 78 days, trying to be heard again in front of a judge. They did get that request, the attorneys stating there were strong doubts of evidence pointing to them as the killers. The prosecutor and attorneys of the West Memphis Three made a deal called an Alford plea.
I hope and pray that they have become rehabilitated,
allowing the three to plead guilty and still maintain their innocence.
The hardest part was taking the Alford plea, knowing that the state was not going to pursue justice and not going to pursue who killed the kids.
That was Jason, one of the ones we saw. That I could tell by his face.
I know to the core of my soul that the only reason the state did not murder me and sweep this case under the rug was because people all over the world were paying attention to it.
That was Damian Eccles.
Now, the fight to clear their names didn't end there, and we'll take a closer look at that in a bit. But the clamor over the West Memphis Three's case came at a unique time in history. The internet was in its fledgling years, something that helped fuel discussion of the story nationwide. In a way, not.
Damian Eccles is extremely intelligent. Even at the age of 18, when we saw them interviewing him for court, I mean, you know, he was saying, I'm the boogeyman, but that's, I mean, any kid at that age would have done that, in my opinion, would have said that because, like he said, he knew he was innocent. So you can't convict me of a crime that I really didn't commit. So I'm going to be out of here. And then he found out, oh, yeah, they can. But he's extremely intelligent. Even at that age, he was super intelligent.
Not really seen before. The case would also become the focus of a documentary, which raised questions about the verdict.
Really, Sarah?
Today, the attention surrounding the West Memphis Three is getting new life. The age of podcasts and true crime and social media are exposing a whole new audience to the case, and once again raising questions about whether justice was really served.
There are people who weren't alive in 1993 who are on TikTok or on social media and learning about it now and saying, what is going on here?
The 90s, full of grunge and counterculture, it became a time for people to express themselves outside of the norm.
When people say it could have been me, they don't mean like I looked and dressed the same. Sometimes, absolutely. It's such a basic through line and I'm innocent. Like there's no evidence here. That's why it could have been any of us.
3 years after the murders in West Memphis, a new documentary would take an in-depth look at the case, which captivated the country.
Right, Ed? I was telling them when we were watching the documentaries, we watched all three of the documentaries that HBO did yesterday and the day before. And I was telling them that I was Gothic and I listened to Metallica and all of that and how it could have been any one of us. Because in my opinion, I was Wiccan in high school and all of that. So, you know, in my opinion, they were convicted on just that because there was no evidence.
Country.
I didn't kill those 3 little boys.
Paradise Lost, the child murders at Robin Hood Hills, showcased several issues in the case that created doubt.
That's the documentaries that we watched in the past 2 live streams, if you guys want to check it out. I was 6 when this happened, paranormal.
And the evidence. So much so, the trial became a national phenomenon. Now fast forward to 2007 and the Free the West Memphis 3 movement. It revived interest, seeing support from celebrities like Natalie Maines of the Chicks. All of this adding to the attention.
When you're putting someone to death, you have to be 100% sure. And there is loads and loads of doubt.
Now, decades later, we're seeing a resurgence of curiosity surrounding the case. Jillian Pensavalle is the creator of the True Crime Obsessed podcast. It's cases like the West Memphis 3 that made her want to bring attention to how the justice system can be flawed.
It was so shocking. It's one of those things where you realize like, oh, the system is completely broken.
Thousands of people tune in to listen to each episode, bringing new attention and a new audience to the West Memphis 3 story.
If I have a platform, I want to use it for good.
And in my show, we take big cases and we cover each week a very small element of the case. And then, 100,000 people or more in our audience dig into those files, give me feedback.
Bob Ruff is the creator and host of the Truth and Justice podcast. He's done multiple seasons on the West Memphis 3 case. For him, it's about trying to find the missing piece that would clear the names of Damien, Jesse, and Jason.
They kind of become high profile.
And they found something, so we're going to look at that next, what the new evidence is to try to find justice. But again, you know, Arkansas convicted them and said that basically they were guilty even though they were pleading innocent. So even if they come with new evidence, are they going to let it be heard in court, or are their egos not going to allow it, would be my question.
Profile, because people like me and other podcasters and documentarians cover them. But the reason they become newsworthy is because the district attorneys won't allow anyone to find the truth.
With these podcasts and the ability to have information at your fingertips, there's a global revival happening to find out what happened to Steve, Christopher, and Michael, and finally close what some say is an unfinished investigation. For people like Bob, they won't stop until the case is solved.
You know, we're fighting hard to fix mistakes from the past, but the other thing that we're trying to do is to prevent mistakes in the future.
It wasn't just new attention to the case that brought about new life, but in a major turn, the discovery of evidence that could lead to new information. But the push to have that evidence retested with new technology sparked a whole new court battle, bringing us to a fight that's still ongoing today.
Yeah, because they're going to say, oh, these boys admitted to doing it. They're guilty. And we're not going to say that we were wrong or convicted somebody, because then, you know, they could be hit with lawsuits. And again, their egos. The ego aspect of this crime is astonishing and sickening, in my opinion. Okay,
We're looking for the real killers.
Thank you for being here.
It's not only to exonerate Damien, Jason, and Jesse, but find the real killers.
Lonnie Sowery is part of Damien Echols' legal team. In 2021, they finally got the chance to move the case forward with new hope. Echols' team combed through evidence that the state had previously told them was destroyed in a fire.
We went into the police department and found the evidence packaged beautifully.
Wow. Why are they telling them it was destroyed in a fire? Again, they don't want anyone putting anything out there that could show that they were wrong in this. Shabugi says, well, the Supreme Court ruled they have to let him get it tested, but he's got to work with prosecution to get it done. That part terrifies me. Yeah, especially if they're saying that evidence burned and it didn't. Paranormal, I hope you have a good day. Thank you for being here.
Beautifully packaged, preserved, in excellent condition.
The hope that this evidence could be retested to show who was at the crime scene and who possibly killed Steve, Christopher, and Michael all those years ago.
We found the ligatures that we were looking for, and we assumed once we found this that the prosecutor would allow us to retest it.
Ligatures used to tie up the boys during the crime, in this case shoelaces, that could be tested with new technology to uncover DNA that couldn't be found before. The new technology, an MVAC machine that can extract DNA in smaller amounts. Echols' attorneys say former prosecutor Scott Ellington with the state judicial district told them that if new evidence was uncovered, they would be able to retest it. But by the time of the discovery, Ellington was no longer the prosecutor, and the new one wasn't so willing to allow that. So Echols and his team went to court again, fighting to get evidence retested. In June 2022, the judge said no, ruling that their petition did not apply to Echols because he is not in state custody. Echols and Jason Baldwin, one of the other West Memphis three, disappointed with the decision.
We have a way in our hands where they can see who killed those children, and they're refusing to do anything about it.
To test
egos,
the evidence to find who committed this crime not only solves the case, but it begins real healing for us and all of our families.
So now Echols finds himself in a familiar situation, one he had to do years ago when pleading his innocence to be freed from prison, going before the Arkansas State Supreme Court to have.
And could you imagine, after knowing for 100% fact that they put you in prison, even though it was obvious, in my opinion, that they were innocent, and then going in front of them again as a free person? Like, I would be living 500,000 miles away from there and never, ever want to even step foot back in that state. I would be scared to death. Could you imagine? And still, throughout all of that, they're still trying to fight to find out who actually committed this crime, this horrific crime that happened to them babies.
have them rule on whether he can proceed. So now it's up to the Arkansas Supreme Court to decide whether to hear the case. That timeline remains uncertain. If they do, the court will decide whether or not that evidence should be retested.
Okay, so this is going to tell us, this is from 6 months ago, saying that the court ruling could allow new DNA testing for the West Memphis 3. We'll see what this one says real quick, unless it's a repeat of what we just heard.
Did someone say holiday cards? At Vistaprint, we
sure didn't, but thanks for asking.
All that the day is coming whenever we will see justice and we'll walk out of this place. It may not come tomorrow. It may not come on September 30th, but it will come.
Tonight, Damian Eccles and the West Memphis 3 might be one step closer to proving their innocence.
That video you just heard was Eccles in 2010, right before he, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miss Kelly, took what's called an Alford plea deal.
It allowed them to maintain their innocence while accepting that the prosecutors had enough evidence to convict them of killing 3 boys in West Memphis back in 1993. But regardless of how that arraignment worked, Damian Eccles has always maintained his innocence. And so tonight at 10, today that legal fight is continuing with a major update in the case.
This morning, the Arkansas Supreme Court cleared the way to test some evidence from the 30-year-old case. All new tonight, TV 11's Ashley Godwin joins us in studio to break down today's decision and how the Eccles legal team is preparing. What's next?
Hey, Faith Rowley, this newest battle in the West Memphis 3 case centers on this evidence right here. A box of evidence that was once thought to be destroyed. Now Damian Eccles' legal team moves forward in what they say is justice and knowing who really killed those 3 little boys.
Once that additional DNA testing started pointing in different directions than the 3, then we first started to have real hope that maybe there was a way this case would break open.
Damian Eccles' lead counsel, Stephen Braga, has been on the case since 2009. Right before Eccles, Jason Baldwin and Jesse Miss Kelly made an Alford plea deal.
I haven't been involved in another case, anything like this in my career. Believe me, this is one of a kind, really dramatic case in terms of, as Judge Laser said at the Alford plea hearing, it's a tragedy on all sides.
Eccles has maintained his innocence since, pushing for justice in the case. And that push came closer to reality in 2021 when evidence thought to have been destroyed was found. Eccles.
Ella says holiday cards. You guys haven't even had Thanksgiving yet. No doubt. That's where I'm at. Shabugi said they have so much stuff they can test. I have a feeling they're going to get someone finally. And with that, I question, where's Terry Hobbs at?
And his legal team want to test it for DNA to see if they can identify who was at the crime scene. But when they took it to court in 2022, a Crittenden County Circuit judge said no, and that the petition they filed under was not applicable in this case because Eccles wasn't in state custody. 2 years later, the Arkansas Supreme Court weighed in on the decision. In a 4-3 majority opinion, the justices say Eccles can test the evidence with this law, and he does not need to be in state custody to seek relief to prove his innocence.
We're going to take the high road and respect both sides. And, luckily we won. We're able to go back and have jurisdiction in the circuit court over the petition for new testing. And, what I would say to anybody who believes that the West Memphis 3, who still believes that the West Memphis 3 committed this crime or Damian is some kind of depraved criminal, well, let's let the testing be done.
Something Eccles and his team have been working on for years, and they say they are closer now than ever to finally knowing the truth.
He really hopes that there's a way to expeditiously get this evidence tested. He has no fear of what the evidence might show, but he is still hopeful that someday the real perpetrator will be found.
So Ashley, we are getting closer to that evidence being tested, but how long could that take?
Faith, the case now goes back to the lower court to allow them to respond. Eccles' lead counsel believes it will take about a month to figure out how he and the Crittenden County prosecutor will move forward with testing the evidence.
Ashley, all right, a new chapter. We know you've been reading through this book for a lot of years.
Well, that is the update on that. Serena says Terry Hobbs is living in the Ozarks somewhere. He'll pop up on the occasional podcast. Wow. I didn't know that. Yeah, of course he's in the Ozarks. My husband could find him though. I can tell you that. He knows the Ozarks. Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and jump into what was the Satanic Panic and kind of what started all this. Alrighty, hold on just a minute. I found a short video on it, and I'm hoping that it's one that somebody did. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm hoping that it'll show what it was. So it's this one right here. And we might be able to watch another case of Satanic Panic that was questionable. So this is from Mental Floss, and it's called Satanic Panic and the Dangers. No,
For about 2 years.
Hold on a minute, y'all. That's the case I want to talk about in a minute.
When you think about activities commonly seen at a preschool,
So it's going to talk about actually the case that I want to talk about as well. But the video is by Mental Floss, and it's called Satanic Panic and the Dangers of Cultural Hysteria. Sorry about that.
things like naps, games, and Play-Doh sculptures probably come to mind. One thing that definitely would not is boiling and eating babies. At least, not unless you grew up in the 1980s, when reports of daycare centers engaging in satanic rituals were widely circulated and readily believed. People went to jail for years based on little more than a widespread conviction that the devil's minions were corrupting and sometimes devouring our children. It was a mass hysteria that grew to include Oprah, the Smurfs, and even McDonald's. It's the story of Satanic Panic, and it's next on this installment of Throwback.
I wanted to try to mute
Where we take a deep dive into some of the most fascinating pop culture stories and events you might remember from your childhood. I'm your host, Erin McCarthy, and this episode is a bit of a departure from the fun stories we've been telling you about how your favorite toys and games came to be. Satanic Panic.
Built to Spill says, I am from the Ozarks and know the lady, well, that led his early campaign for prison ministry, and he is now a member of that group and was in the group's solitary part while in prison, OTO and AA. Really? The group gets associated with Satanic Panic, but not Satanic religion. Right. Yeah, they were not Wicca. We talked about Wicca in the other, when we were watching the documentaries. Wicca is the study of nature and what they call white magic, which means not to harm anyone. Black magic is related with Satanism and Satanic Panic, but those boys were in no way Satanism. Satanism, Sarah says Satanism is a non-religion. Yeah, it is. It is actually a religion, but again, like Damien Eccles said on trial, you have to be Christian to believe in Satan, because Satan is a Christian. He said it more eloquently, but it's a Christian deity, not deity, but demon. And he didn't believe in that because they believe in God, like Mother God and things like that of nature. Okay, so I'll play this now. This is going to go to Satanic Panic, and we're going to talk about a couple of other cases that were actual Satanic Panic.
Panic was a phenomenon that swept North America. And at the height of the craze, you basically couldn't open up the newspaper or turn on the news without hearing about subliminal messages hidden in rock music, pagan symbols and cartoons, or criminal trials involving teachers engaging in human sacrifice. As outlandish as all of this seems now, it was a very real concern back then, thanks to a mixture of urban legends, unqualified experts, and an overzealous media. And while no babies were actually eaten, the whole ordeal still managed to ruin a lot of lives. If there was any biggest cause of Satanic Panic, it may have been a book that came out of the otherwise eminently rational country of Canada. That's right, the same place that gave us international treasures Michael J. Fox and Celine Dion also opened the door to a decade of demonic conspiracy.
Damn it, Abellis.
Here's how. It's fair to say that Satan was kind of a big deal in the 1970s. Novelist William Peter Blatty scored a huge hit in 1971 with The Exorcist, a story of demonic possession that Blatty claimed was loosely inspired by a real exorcism performed by the Catholic Church. The book was followed by a film adaptation in 1973 that continued those claims and was so shocking that there were reports of people fainting during screenings. Films like The Omen and The Amityville Horror followed, placing the focus squarely on paranormal events that used religious iconography to make their stories more believable. Thanks to figures like Charles Manson, ritualized evil didn't seem that far-fetched. And with the general public having some idea of the occult, it wasn't hard for them to believe in a story involving Satanism and abuse. That set the stage for the 1980 book Michelle Remembers, where a psychiatrist named Lawrence Pazder detailed what he claimed was the true story of patient Michelle Smith, an adult who underwent over 600 hours of hypnosis to recall long repressed memories of being involved in a satanic cult as a child. With shocking stories of abuse, sacrifice, and demonic rituals, Michelle Remembers caused
I think that if I'm not mistaken, that one or it might be a different case has been proven false because the patient basically admitted to things that never happened.
a stir and was widely seen as a legitimate chronicle of a horrific underground movement. But there was a problem.
Right.
While Pazder insisted Michelle
Sarah?
Smith's memories were genuine, they didn't stand up to closer scrutiny. She said rituals took place in a cemetery in Victoria, Canada in the 1950s, but no residents ever reported anything strange happening there. She also said priests in this cult had to lop off a finger, but no one in Victoria remembered anyone walking around missing a digit. Even though reporters expressed some doubts about Pazder's book, it went on to become a huge success and may have made subsequent reports of satanic activity more plausible in the eyes of the public. And there would be a lot of those reports in the years to come. One of the most common myths during the height of the Satanic Panic was the idea that family-friendly corporations were secretly in league with the devil. These urban legends actually predate Michelle Remembers in some cases, and the earliest victim may have been Ronald McDonald. In October 1978, McDonald's felt compelled
I dropped the link if anybody wants to come up on panel.
to publicly announce that franchise founder Ray Kroc was not a financial supporter of the Church of Satan. The story started when McDonald's got a letter from a woman in Ohio asking why Kroc donated 20% of the company's profits to a satanic cause. McDonald's dismissed the question as silly until more letters started coming in along the same lines. Before long, bags of letters demanding to know why the Golden Arches were part of a demonic cabal were arriving, and the company was forced to comment on what was probably their worst PR problem until the arrival of the McPizza. According to the Reverend John McFarland of the Kenmore Church of God in Akron, Ohio, a parishioner told him that she saw Ray Kroc admit to being a supporter of the Church of Satan on the Phil Donahue show. McFarland was shocked. He hadn't seen the show for himself, but he took her at her word and published details in the church's newsletter, Moments of Sunshine. Pretty soon, the story was in other church newsletters. Like a game of telephone, it spiraled out of control, with some believing that Kroc gave the Church of Satan 50% of the company's profits. Because people were opposed to the idea of buying Happy Meals if part of the proceeds went to the Church of Satan, McDonald's sent executives out to churches with sworn statements from television executives insisting Kroc never said those things. He actually was on the Phil Donahue show in May 1977, and the episode was repeated in June 1978, but at no point did he express a desire to financially support devil worship.
Can we understand now how things get twisted? We can also remember that on these YouTube streets out here. Just simple things can be mistaken and misstrued, and it caused McDonald's to have to go and send PR people out for something that wasn't even true. Like, it's crazy.
McFarland published a retraction in his newsletter, but that didn't get nearly as much attention as the original rumor. Another major company to suffer from hearsay was Procter & Gamble, the famous household products corporation. Take a look at their old logo and you'll see 13 stars. Starting in 1980, word began to spread that the stars were secretly the mark of the devil. So many people believed this that Procter & Gamble actually set up a toll-free number for consumers to call and hear a recording assuring them that their laundry soap was not being used to support Satan. The stars were actually chosen back in 1882 to represent the country's original 13 colonies. Thanks to the rumor, however, Procter & Gamble soon got rid of the century-old logo.
Wow. They had to make a phone line where people could call and be told that their laundry soap wasn't being used to support Satan. That is insane.
Throughout the 1980s, a number of children's characters were
Sarah.
accused of being in league with the devil, or at least with what some called heathen gods. Thundercats was purportedly intended to promote Eastern mysticism. The He-Man and Snake Mountain playset supposedly invoked demonic imagery because kids could use a microphone to deepen their voices and pretend to be evil. The Smurfs were blue and had black lips. That could be construed as being corpse-like, making the Smurfs members of the undead. Or I guess to be technical, members of the Smurf dead. Not even Rainbow Bright was safe. According to some interpretations, the beauty mark on her cheek was actually a pentagram. But no toy or game took more of a beating than Dungeons & Dragons. First released in 1974, the tabletop game put players in the roles of heroes and
I don't know if you've ever heard. I've heard this stuff about the Smurfs being actual demons. Maybe we can look into that at some point. But yeah, there's some interesting things going back to toys and cartoons from that time.
Sorcerers using magic spells to face off against various monsters. For those who believed popular culture was steeped in satanic messaging, this was all the proof they needed. The controversy grew even stronger in 1979, when a 16-year-old Michigan State University college student named James Egbert disappeared. Friends told authorities he was a fan of Dungeons & Dragons, which somehow led to investigators becoming convinced he had gotten lost in the underground steam tunnels near the college after getting too immersed in a gaming session. The truth...
Chill Chaser said McDonald's should put out the Satanic Panic sandwich. Yeah, they could call it the McSatan.
wasn't quite so sensational, but it was tragic. Among other things, Egbert was apparently stressed over having advanced so far in school at such a young age. He was dealing with personal problems and had decided to run away. Sadly, he died by suicide not long after. But the story of his becoming obsessed with the game persisted, and a made-for-television movie called Mazes and Monsters was produced in 1982 that kept the narrative alive. Inspired by the Egbert case, it was one of the first starring roles for an aspiring actor named Tom Hanks. Parents grew so concerned over Dungeons & Dragons that one even formed a group called BAD, or Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons. The controversy hardly dissuaded people from playing the game, though. In 1982, TSR, which manufactured the game and its accessories, sold $16 million in rulebooks. For some, panic meant profit. Even if you're not familiar with Satanic Panic, you've probably heard of the idea that certain songs played backward in a technique known as backmasking reveal subliminal messages.
I've heard that about AC/DC and one of my favorite bands, Led Zeppelin. There is some actual satanic stuff in relation to Led Zeppelin. They lived in Aleister Crowley's house and all of that stuff.
Music was especially susceptible to those accusations in the 1980s, when bands like Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones were charged with hiding their support of the devil in their records. The whole concept of satanic messages being audible when music is played backward probably has roots in the work of Aleister Crowley. The infamous early 20th century occultist advised that you could train yourself to think backwards by, among other things, learning to speak backwards, and even listening to phonograph records in reverse. In the case of one band, the possibility of hidden lyrics led to a lawsuit. In December 1985, two friends, 18-year-old Raymond Belknap and 20-year-old James Vance, ended a night of drinking by agreeing to a suicide pact. Belknap died, while Vance was left with severe injuries. Vance's parents sued the band Judas Priest for $6.2 million because both young men had been fans of their music, and rumors persisted that hidden messages like "Do It" and "Let's Be Dead" were buried in songs like "Better by You, Better Than Me." The civil case went to court in 1990 with audio experts playing the songs backward and forward at different speeds. Ultimately, a judge ruled that the plaintiffs didn't prove subliminal messages were deliberately placed on the album, and the band wasn't liable. In fact, it's not really possible to write lyrics that can make sense when played both normally and backwards.
Right. That would be a feat that would really surprise the shit out of me. I don't know where Overprotected is. I wish she was here because, yeah, she does like this stuff.
When words or phrases are apparently discernible when something's played in reverse, it's really just the brain trying to make sense of gibberish. That might be why when two evangelists from Ohio insisted in 1986 that the theme song to the 1960s television sitcom Mr. Ed contained demonic messages like, "The source is Satan," and "Someone heard this song for Satan," even they admitted it probably wasn't done by the producers on purpose. As silly as some of these examples are, Satanic Panic also led to some very serious and life-altering consequences. In 1983, one mother accused an employee of the McMartin preschool in Manhattan Beach, California, of molesting her child, triggering a massive investigation that went back 2 decades and eventually grew to include...
We're going to talk about that next, before I end today.
Include 7 employees of the preschool and 360 children who said they had been abused. As the investigation continued, the claims of the children grew increasingly bizarre. Some said a teacher flew through the air. Others claimed they were forced to witness the sacrifice of other children. At the heart of this sensational story was Children's Institute International, a child advocacy group that was responsible for interviewing kids about their traumatic experiences. While their approach to interviewing the children was not ostensibly intended to be coercive, many of the kids heard declarative statements like, "We know what happened, just tell us," and felt compelled to repeat or make up stories of abuse, including details of satanic worship. If they refuted allegations, they might be told they were too scared to talk. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times in 2005, one man, now an adult, reflected back on his experience with investigators as a child. He said that he would be asked questions over and over again until he learned to give them the answer they wanted. And because he had siblings in the McMartin school, he wanted them to be safe. To a kid, it felt like doing the right thing. Many of these interviewing techniques were later discredited. No physical evidence was ever produced to support the kids' claims, and some later admitted to lying in order to tell authorities what they thought they wanted to hear. But at the time, the McMartin case was being used as a template. Other places, like Rogers Park Daycare, had employees arrested over accusations that they boiled and ate infants. Social workers involved in the McMartin case were cited as experts in such cases, lending them credibility. At least one police department even had a pamphlet for law enforcement to use when investigating suspected ritualistic criminal activity. The McMartin case lasted 6 years, the longest.
Yeah, the McMartin case, that was another thing, another one of the cases that I got really into and watched a bunch of documentaries on it. We're going to watch a recap. I don't know if I can find the original, but there's a recap that kind of goes over it again, and we'll watch that.
Longest and most expensive trial in the history of California up to that point. One of the experts consulted in the case was actually Lawrence Pazder, author of Michelle Remembers. In the end, the defendants were all exonerated, but one, an employee named Ray Buckey, served 5 years in prison before the charges against him were dismissed. In a separate case with even more disastrous consequences, Dan and Fran Keller of Texas served nearly 22 years following convictions in a case that included accusations they served blood to children in their daycare, among other horrible acts. They were eventually released and declared innocent. The fallout doesn't end there. There's also been an untold mental toll on the children who were forced to discuss these gruesome scenes, as well as parents who spent years believing their children had been assaulted. All of it was due to a strong belief that kids were being subjected to horrible atrocities that didn't actually exist. Satanic panic persisted through the end of the 1980s, with television personalities like Oprah Winfrey and Geraldo Rivera devoting airtime to the topic. Always one for subtlety, Geraldo estimated that over 1 million Satanists were lurking in communities across the country, perpetuating the fear of the devil being just around the corner. But after the McMartin case was debunked and the Department of Justice stated that there has never been any...
I'm seeing that y'all haven't really heard about it. Maybe I can find the original. I have the revisiting the Martinsville Satanic panic scandal, but we'll see what we can find.
Evidence of any ritualistic satanic sex abuse cults, the idea seemed to evaporate. Concerned parents went on to worry about other things, like violent video games. So why did satanic panic endure for as long as it did? Some people believe it was a textbook case of mass hysteria, not unlike the Salem witch trials. Urban legends were able to take on a new strength because children were seemingly in danger. Other times, a lack of evidence meant people could believe what they wanted. After all, there was no proof Ray Kroc didn't donate to the Church of Satan. And while it might sound odd now, we're still telling a lot of the same stories today, from killer clowns to strangers lurking in back seats. Our next episode will be about a much more fun topic, I promise. And if you have an idea for a future episode of Throwback, pop it in the comments below. I'm Meredith.
So let me see. I'm going to try to find the original real quick for you guys before I play the one that's on my playlist. Hold on just a minute. Hold on just a minute. Okay. Yeah, I know the one I watched was by the Fifth Estate. Let's see what this one. Oh, that's somebody else's thing. I think the one I saw was that one, but I'll see what we see. Yeah, so this is the one that I saw. So we'll watch this one.
years in the early 90s.
All right, so this is from the Fifth Estate, and it's called Hell to Pay, revisiting the Martinsville Satanic Smex scandal in 2003.
It was transformed from a family-friendly town just outside Saskatoon into Canada's most notorious address. Martinsville, it seemed, had become infested with devil worshippers, child sex abusers, maybe even satanic killers. All too weird to believe? Well, no, not at first, and not for a long time. For months and months, there was hell to pay as lives were turned upside down with arrests, sensational charges, trials. Tonight, for the first time, the Fifth Estate will show you what went wrong. We'll hear from those at the heart of the case and show you videotape that's never before been broadcast. It's dead of night, April 24th, 1992. A local cop and his partner are on high alert. They've been warned terrible things could happen that night, possibly even human sacrifice.
I like when they set the scene like this.
Gang with ties to the occult is supposed to be heading for Martinsville. Constable Mike Swan is packing every gun he can find on orders from the chief.
And he authorized us to go ahead and bring in our own guns and just be as heavily armed as possible. And at the time, I've got to admit that I had never been more scared in my life.
The chief tells his men he got a tip. There's a hit list, and a Martinsville family is on it. As the night wears on, Swan worries about what will happen if he doesn't make it home that night.
Oh, Eek, this case is crazy.
I told a friend of mine if something did happen to me that he would make sure that Barb and the kids were looked after.
In the end, no one dies. The satanic gang never shows up. And in the light of day, the whole threat would seem bizarre. But by this time, Martinsville was already 6 months into a nightmare where nothing is too strange. It all began with a mother's grave suspicion. She was a nurse at a Saskatoon hospital. One day in the fall of 1991, she finished her shift and drove the 15 minutes home to Martinsville, a place with small-town values and where lots of families had young kids. When she worked in the city, she sent her 3 to the babysitters, just a few streets away.
I do want to give y'all a trigger warning. They're going to talk about some very graphic things in this. I do have it scrolling across the bottom of the screen, just to reiterate.
The house was full of kids, from infants to grade schoolers. The babysitter's husband worked at a provincial jail. His friends were cops. It seemed perfect. But at bath time that night, the mother noticed something peculiar. Her 2-year-old had had diarrhea, so she expected a diaper rash. But the redness and chafing around her daughter's genitals looked like something more. When she questioned her daughter, the little girl said, "A stranger poked at my bum with a pink rope." And that was the last ordinary day in Martinsville for some time.
Bill, that is awful. I'm so sorry to hear that. Yeah, thank you, Eek, for the trigger warning. I wanted to warn y'all because I knew I was about to talk about this. This very big trigger warning, y'all.
Town police took the mother's complaint and immediately assigned their newest constable, Claudia Bryden, barely out of police college. She wondered if one child may have been abused, what about the others? So she tracked down more parents whose kids went to the same babysitters.
I'm not even sure anymore. It's a long time.
This mother sent her 5-year-old there. She wants her identity hidden to protect him.
It's been that long.
Back then, when police first called, she couldn't believe the babysitter might be involved. So she phoned and asked.
And I can remember being on the phone and I'm just crying and I'm saying, tell me that it's not true. Nothing happened, And of course, all that they could say was, no, nothing's going on. They don't know what they're talking about.
Nothing going on. That's what the kid said too, at first. But when Bryden teamed up with the
Hold
Saskatoon
on
police
just a
officer
minute.
Rod Moore, they extracted frightening details. Bit by bit, the kids said they were
gosh.
fondled
I'm
and
having
forced into oral sex,
issues.
that a vibrator was pushed up their bottoms, and that
Again, trigger warning, y'all. I'm sorry. Hey, I'm sorry. I was having an issue. I have to put a overlay up just to be sure. But if you want to come back up, you can. I'm sorry. I was having issues and couldn't get to it in time. The person that was just up here trying to get on stage. Okay. Hey, how are you?
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Hello. I'm good.
You're welcome.
Am I too late? Are you ending the stream now? Did you guys already discuss Delphi?
We did. If you want to, you can go back to the beginning. If you take the little red ball across the bottom, you can like back it up and you can go to the beginning of the stream. And we talked about Delphi for about an hour.
Shit. Well, I'm in California, so I might be on a different time zone than you guys are.
Oh, yeah, I'm on the East Coast. So yeah, I've already talked about it, but like I said, you can go back and replay it if you want to.
All right. Well,
All right.
okay.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Okay, y'all, hold on just a second. All right.
guns were used to threaten them. And where did this happen? At the babysitters. If that wasn't enough, one kid began to talk about another place, a place the children were driven to, a place he called the Devil Church. When that leaked out, a local pilot flying over Martinsville said he'd found the place. He would tell police it was a blue building 6 kilometers northwest of town.
I guess the worst part of it was when he was saying that how they would get that building and they'd get put in the van and they'd have black sheets of paper, to cover the windows.
And it was here that the story spun into madness. Inside the Devil Church, one kid said he was stripped naked, hoisted in a cage, and poked at.
Again, very heavy trigger warning.
Still others said an axe handle was shoved up their bottoms. Several kids said they were stuffed in a freezer, and one said he was abused on a waterbed. And they were threatened never to tell their parents.
And they were totally helpless, and with the threats that they got, they were going to kill their mom and cut their mom's legs off.
As terrible as that was, the investigators heard more. As the months wore on, the children said they remembered uniforms and police cars. They said it wasn't just the babysitters who abused them, it was the very people sworn to protect them. From photos, the kids picked out police officers from 3 different forces.
See how crazy this got? And I don't remember where it all originated from, but you have to question, is some of it legit?
And the case suddenly turned inward.
How would they know all that? And I don't remember it probably. I haven't watched this in years. It probably tells us where it all came from, but it's just insane that children would even be saying things like that.
Watch how a police camera captured the very moment a Saskatoon officer was told he too was a suspect.
What is it then? There's something going on there. That was the original theory. Okay, well then you would have. No, I scanned it. Come on. Don't accuse me of that shit. I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you. Don't you threaten me. And don't tell me that I'm involved in Martinsville.
Serena says, pretty sure they claim to be flushed down a giant toilet too. Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, but where would they get all this stuff unless they were led to confessing to it? I can't remember what was said. Oh, there was a psychologist that used hypnosis. That was the McMartin. Okay. Thank you for that. Cause I was like, couldn't remember.
10 minutes later, he's angrier.
Okay, you know what I feel like doing right now? I'm man. I'm gonna pop you one. Okay? I can understand. Yeah, I'm gonna pop you one.
Soon it's pleading.
And there's nothing I can do to change your mind. You think it's there. It's not there. Yeah, we both have the same nature, you see? It's not there.
And then he breaks.
You cool? No, I just scared. Terry, I'm scared. Okay.
By spring 1992, Martinsville was reeling. Sex abuse, first at the neighbors, then the Devil Church. Add cops as conspirators, and then throw in Satan.
Yes, Eek. He said he was going to pop him. He's going to punch him in the face. Of course, how would you be able to react to that, if you really were innocent? What would you do?
Rumors of a satanic cult in town, the Brotherhood of the Ram, and among its members, police officers. That got the attention of the chief of police. He would report that one source told him 2 local children have been selected on a hit list as possible human sacrifices. And Mike Johnston would write in his notes, it would appear that there is a very strong satanic group in the area. In town, whispers were now in the open. Rumors accepted as fact. Nothing was more heinous than hurting kids, and now Satan and the police were wrapped up in it too. It was an explosive story, and of course, it lured the press.
I meant to tell y'all, Basil is laying on the bed. I saw y'all dropping emojis of him earlier. He's laying down. He's sleeping.
At the Saskatoon Star-Phoenix, Bill Peterson was publisher.
Oh, you're good.
And it just
Serena.
sort of grew and grew and grew to a point where there was a level of panic or hysteria right throughout the community. No question, the media shared in that panic. I think there was a degree of panic, to my eye at least, in the police and in the Justice Department.
Pent up panic, and then it burst. Under tremendous pressure to do something, Martinsville police pounced. On a morning in June 1992, they rounded up the babysitter, Linda Sterling, and her husband, Ron.
You want to get out of my yard right now? Back off.
Their 23-year-old son, Travis Sterling, and a young offender were picked up that same day. Next, the cops. One of their own, Martinsville's Jim Elstad, led the parade. 5 would eventually be taken in. One of them, John Popowich, who'd gone in 1 hour from police officer to pedophile. In all, 9 people were accused of the most horrible acts against children. It was a triumph for Martinsville's police chief.
We're talking sexual assaults, sexual interference, unlawful confinements.
Why are you smiling, sir? And it reminds me of that officer in Arkansas, if I'm just being honest.
Point firearms, assaults, aggravated assaults.
How does this compare with anything else you've ever been involved with investigation-wise?
It doesn't. I've been a police officer for 25 years, and this is probably the culmination of all investigations.
Back then, Saskatchewan's justice minister was Bob Mitchell. He clearly remembers the day his deputy and a senior justice official came rushing into his office.
And they chartered a plane. There's all kinds of ways to go from Regina to Saskatoon without chartering a plane. And they were in a big hurry. They were on their way to the airport because a large number of charges had been presented to the prosecutors in Saskatoon to in what later became the Martinsville case.
Even the premier, Roy Romano, headed for Martinsville. Meantime, the accused were banished, barred from even visiting the town by order of the court, and the Martinsville case began to wind its way to trial. The first of those trials started in March.
How can you be banished from visiting the town you live in? I'm wondering.
1993 in Saskatoon. In the absence of other evidence, the kids' testimony would be crucial. To ensure the children weren't intimidated, a judge ordered a screen to hide them from the accused.
And he said, pull down your pants and underwear. So I did.
First to be tried was the young offender, whom we still can't name. The town got the verdict it expected, guilty on 7 counts. Next up was the Saskatoon cop you saw being interrogated, John Popowich. Armed with similar evidence, the prosecutors may have anticipated the same verdict. But on day 8 of that trial, a major turning point. The boys who said Popowich abused them couldn't pick him out in court. The judge called it mistaken identity, and Popowich was freed. That set the stage for
Thank God for that. Yeah, right, Sarah?
the babysitter and her family, and that trial dragged on for 5 months. In the end, the jury decided Travis Sterling, the son, was guilty, but his parents, Ron and Linda Sterling, were not.
We told people at the beginning of the hearing that we were not guilty of any charges, and neither is our son. We believe that, and we're going to fight this right to the bitter end.
It was not going well for Saskatoon prosecutors Bruce Bauer and Leslie Sullivan, especially with 4 more cases to come.
The judge was quite pointed in his charge to the jury that in many cases there wasn't very much evidence connecting these people to certain incidents in certain places. How does that make your cases feel in terms of going forward with it?
We're not going to discuss other cases. I'm sorry.
Are you prosecuting the next case? Are you going to be in court Monday?
But their boss overruled that. There wouldn't be a next case.
Saskatchewan Justice has announced that a stay of proceedings has been filed with respect to the remaining 4 adults charged in the Martinsville case.
The Martinsville case was in tatters. When we come back, hell to pay.
I'm Susan Ormiston from CBC.
Yes,
I want to talk to you about the Martinsville investigation. Sir?
By February 1994, it had dawned on Martinsville that its nightmarish bubble had burst. The courts had ruled there was no devil church, no Satan, no conspiracy of pedophiles. Remember, 9 people were charged, and in the end, 8 were freed. After appeals, only Travis Sterling, the babysitter's son, would go to jail. And that was for fondling and touching 2 kids. Serious, but nothing like the legend of ritual abuse. No one was happy, but Saskatchewan's justice minister wanted it buried.
In those circumstances, considering all of the circumstances, I don't think a public inquiry is appropriate.
But as it turns out, the Saskatchewan government couldn't shake the Martinsville saga so easily. One cop sued for malicious prosecution, and bit by bit, we learn more about what went on behind the hysteria in Martinsville. New information reveals there were serious missteps in both the investigation and the prosecution of this case. It could have and should have been stopped, or at least contained, long before it came here to court.
Does this sound familiar in reference to the West Memphis 3? So, I mean, again, and this is in Canada, just showing it happens all over the place.
Things went wrong right from the start. Remember the stakeout, dead of night, Martinsville police armed and ready? The chief had bought in to a rumor that a gang of Satanists were coming by busload, no less, to kill.
And he said that he had information obtained from a woman in Saskatoon that placed 2 busloads of heavily armed Satanists coming up from the Estevan, Moose Jaw areas.
But as dawn approached, and of course, no sign of the devil's bus, Constable Mike Swan and his partner began to feel silly.
It just became more and more ludicrous. And if Mike Johnson had actually believed this, then he was setting us up to go down really hard. We just couldn't even conceive what kind of game he was playing.
By then, Martinsville's mayor, Rob Friesen, was wondering too, beginning to doubt the man he sat next to, his chief.
It seemed to me that the longer it went, the more flags, if you want to call them that, went up that say, hey, there's something funny here.
I'm glad that they did have the presence of mind to say something here is not right, and stop the case, stop it where it was, and that these people were not convicted on the maliciousness of the statements and the craziness of it all.
There's maybe not as much to this as we're led to believe. Mike was very insistent that there was something going on. There was some satanic stuff happening.
And there seemed to be no stopping the chief. Remember the big roundup? It was on Johnston's orders that 9 people were picked up and charged. Constable Mike Swan arrested his colleague Jim Elstad and then took the paperwork to the prosecutor.
And he says, "Who's this for?" And I said, "Jim Elstad." And he says, "What the fuck is he doing now?" Referring to Johnson. And then he just sort of clammed up and he went in his office.
Turned out the chief jumped the gun. The prosecutors had told him not to arrest anyone until all the evidence was in. They later complained about it in a letter to their boss. Without any authorization by the Crown, Chief Johnston prematurely laid charges and arranged for the arrest of all the accused. Today, Mike Johnston is not a police chief anywhere. His force was disbanded after the Martinsville case collapsed.
I mean, I would hope so if he wasn't listening to his superiors.
I'm Susan Ormiston from CDC.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
want to talk to you about the Martinsville investigation. Sir?
He lives in another town now, and he won't talk about the
More to
past.
talk about. We're just here because we're talking about the Martinsville investigation. We're wondering, when you made the arrests in June, why you made those arrests and what you think about it now 10 years later. Sir? You got anything to say about the investigation?
In the end, he had to turn over the investigation anyway. It was too big. Saskatchewan Justice had called in a special task force, Operation Foray. At an airport office, senior RCMP and Saskatoon City Police sifted through the evidence. They were trying to shore up nearly 180 charges, and from the start, they had doubts. Former RCMP Staff Sergeant Rick Pearson was the lead investigator.
We come along as
Eek says he was thinking about the clout he was going to get, and I agree.
a task force, and we're going to organize the material, and we're going to move the investigation forward. But at the end of the day, we start to see flaws of what doesn't seem to hold any water. And we start to question it and analyze it and start to investigate backwards and try and twist and turn what we are looking at to say, well, what do we really have here?
What they had were 3 pillars of evidence on which most of the case was built. They had that mysterious place in the country. They had 9 suspects, and they had the children's evidence of horrific crimes. But what we now know is those pillars had weak foundations, and under scrutiny, they would tumble one by one. Remember the blue building? Where the kids said they were forced into sex on a waterbed? Where they were abused with an axe handle, put in a freezer, and caged? A house of horrors, if it were true. But when it was searched, there wasn't a trace of blood or hair or semen anywhere. Even a special Lumalight, as it's called, couldn't find anything. The place was clean.
When we looked at all the information we had, we started to have our doubts about whether or not children actually had been taken to this location. Some things did not seem right.
Indeed, they weren't. On a second look, there was no waterbed. The freezer was used for storing meat, the axe for cutting wood, and the cage to house newly hatched chicks. In fact, none of the kids had ever been there. So how did they come up with their stories?
Have you ever seen that building?
Turns out, early in the investigation, they were shown pictures of the blue building and the things inside. And over the months, the kids began generating stories about them. The same thing happened with some of the suspects. One child said he remembered a cop driving him to a place in the country. And then from police photos, other children began to point out other officers, and the list of police suspects kept growing.
We had some names given to us as potential suspects that hadn't yet been pursued in this investigation. And this was some of the new work that we were going to pursue. when we talk to these people, we realize that something's not right. That some of the identifications just were wrong.
Like Saskatoon Police Constable Murray Grismer. He was named as a suspect early on. He was suspended from his job and lived in limbo, fearing he too might be charged.
You became reclusive in so much as we didn't leave our home. And anytime somebody would drive on our property, the dog would.
I have my air on, so I'm trying not to talk much because it's loud. But Sarah says, y'all, it's a good time for a reminder to do your own research for anything that mainstream media touches. There's usually a narrative, and the truth is typically somewhere intertwined. Great point.
Dog would bark, and you'd think, is this the time? Is this the moment when the insanity goes beyond where it has already been?
But by then, the tide had begun to turn. Grismer had been off work for 111 days by the time the task force finally cleared him.
And I actually think that had the task force not got involved in this, and had those people not had the strength of their convictions to do the right things for the right reasons, we could have seen people go to jail that had no business being there.
Okay, so you don't hear anything really loud right now?
And that's a,
Other than the video.
sad comment on our justice system.
The head of the task force, Rick Pearson, says that third pillar, the children's interviews, was problematic from day one. And remember, this was the only evidence the prosecution had. The case would be decided on the children's testimony.
So this person that was driving, what do you think should happen to this person? I agree.
Okay, cool. Thank you guys for letting me know. I had it off because I was scared it would be too loud. But Basil was getting hot. He was breathing kind of heavy. He's laying in the sunlight. And the bird was kind of panting a little bit too. Thank you for letting me know. I wonder if the kids are mentally okay now as well, because all these thoughts and craziness were put in their heads. And what if some of them still think that they were telling the truth?
And did you know that a policeman that has been accused of touching kids out in Martinsville?
Experts who reviewed these tapes, even the prosecution's own expert, said the questions were leading. When the kids gave the right answers, they were rewarded with praise. The tape's poor quality here, but listen closely.
I would be wearing my shirt and my pants would be down, just like I'm not completely off, just down to my ankles.
Okay, how did they get down?
They made us pull them down.
Very good. I'm impressed to see it.
As a set, these interviews of these children failed to present information that would provide a basis for any reliable conclusion that any abuse had occurred to any of these children.
Dr. David Raskin testified.
So yeah, it's questionable when we hear that they're rewarded. When he says they pulled them down to my ankles, and then the person asking them questions, very good, very good. You know, of course the child is going to say things like that to be praised.
The babysitter, Linda Sterling, at her trial. He's an American psychologist with decades of experience evaluating children's statements. He said one of the kids' interviews in particular set the tone.
The initial interview was continual denials, even though there was repeated pressure and suggestion and questioning over and over and over again. This child denied and denied and denied. 4 days later, the same child was re-interviewed in a very, very suggestive and pressured interview and began to say things. But those ideas had been planted 4 days previously when the child denied everything.
So have you ever been for a ride in a police car?
It was the rookie cop, Claudia Bryden, who interviewed many of these kids over and over. Later, much of the blame for the runaway investigation was heaped on her. Today, she's still a police officer, not in Martinsville, and she wasn't anxious to talk to the Fifth Estate. But she did agree to answer one question.
Claudia,
You were a relatively new police officer when you took on this major file. Wouldn't it have made sense to ask for some help?
Look, the fact that I sought my supervisor's assistance.
Sarah says, "Oh, I love conspiracy theories. I love the craziest ones because the human brain fascinates me. However, logic and reason should always be first and foremost. You expand when shit doesn't add up still." And I agree. I think I agree with that 100%.
And advice throughout the investigation has been a part of the public record now for a very long time. It's very clear that I did ask for help. The fact is, I'm just not prepared to talk in detail about what went on.
But that didn't help the prosecutors back in 1992. They knew the interviews might not hold up. Their only option? Do a new set with the same kids and see what happened. In notes, they wrestled with, do we patch our case? Or do we avoid looking like we had a shaky case to begin with and trying to fix it?
At that time, in our opinion, we were into somewhat of damage control in that the original evidence was now being reworked with new interviews.
Just 1 month before the first trial, Sergeant Rick Pearson laid it out. He told the prosecutors, in the opinion of the task force, their evidence had holes in 3 key areas. He put it in writing, opening a rift. Seems like you weren't on the same team, that there were 2 divergent paths here.
That's true. There was criticism, I believe, of the task force in that it didn't go the direction that they wanted it to go. There was a divergence, particularly, I suppose, between myself and the prosecutors. I was a lead investigator, and I was not going to have my investigators going into areas I thought were impossible to get anything out of.
You or the task force never stood up and said, stop this investigation. Are you comfortable with that?
Maybe in hindsight, I could have stood up and said, stop the train because it's on the wrong track here.
But it was too late. There was too much momentum. The Martinsville case would hurtle along until it became not a great moment in Saskatchewan justice history, but a political embarrassment, one the justice minister didn't want to examine.
During the trial.
Yeah, this is crazy.
The conduct of the prosecution, I think, is not being questioned by anyone. So I'm not sure what it is that we would inquire into.
Today, Bob Mitchell is retired from politics. He admits Martinsville was the worst episode in his long career, but he says as a minister he had to stay at arm's length from the prosecution and claims he didn't know the case was unraveling.
I'm hearing this for the first time as you speak to me right now. Do you understand what I mean? I mean, I'm hearing this for the first time. That there is this, that there was these doubts or these concerns.
One might ask, why set up a task force of investigating senior officers if their advice to prosecution is ignored?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have an answer for it.
Can you understand?
I'm surprised that that advice was ignored.
It's kind of unusual and distressing, I would think, for many people that the Minister of Justice has to learn this 10 years later. In an interview.
There you have it. Yeah. You've raised some questions that I think impact upon the prosecutorial process.
Zaya said, but sometimes in modern cases, they become a deflection. If we push those theories to be facts, they aren't. Right. Exactly. Another great point.
That's serious stuff. If I had known about those things at the time, I certainly wouldn't have said that in the legislature.
Bruce Bauer is still a Crown prosecutor in Saskatoon, and Martinsville still dogs him. Some of the wrongly accused are suing the province and him. Yeah, it's just
that the court, though, if you want to come and talk.
Yeah, we're doing a look into the Martinsville prosecution, and
Because of those civil suits, his lawyer advised him not to talk to the Fifth Estate. But we wanted to approach him directly.
And we really think that, you deserve a chance to sort of defend that, and no one from the justice will talk about it.
Well, there's a number of other cases going ahead right now in civil court. So we can't really talk about any of the cases because they're all interconnected. So,
Do you think it was a poor prosecution?
well, as I said, I can't really comment any more than that.
When we come back, 10 years later, the Martinsville case won't go away for anyone.
Not there. I've often wondered about people being accused of something they never done. Terry, there's nothing there. I've never done anything like that. I've never even thought of anything like that.
10 years ago in Martinsville, Saskatchewan, they were the damned.
Terry, God damn it, I've never been there.
Pedophiles, or so the town thought, and no punishment could be too severe. Ron Sterling was a pariah, head of a family that preyed on kids. And this walk would be played over and over on television.
Yeah, and they were convicted by the public before they ever had a chance to stand trial. And it still happens a lot today.
Get out of my yard right now.
Like Richard Allen or the West Memphis
Ron
3.
Sterling was not guilty, but he paid a high price anyway.
I do,
That they
Zaya.
could believe that we could do anything like that to their children hurts beyond belief.
He and his wife, Linda, lost their home in Martinsville. They started over in Prince Albert. Once he was deputy head of a correctional center. Now he drives a cab.
Right, I need you 11826 West.
Good morning, everybody. Five's in the car.
This is one of the most terrible charges you can face. As far as I'm concerned, it's even worse than murder. Murder, there's some excuse for that people seem to accept. This, there is no excuse for.
Go ahead. I need you on civil.
How do you get over something like this? Our lives are gone. Our reputation is gone. My job is gone.
Have you ever thought of moving out of Saskatchewan?
No.
Why?
Where am I going to go? What am I going to do?
That is really sad.
Why would I want to go someplace else?
Somewhere where you're more anonymous?
You're not
Oh, Sarah,
anonymous
I'm
anywhere.
sorry.
We're still recognizable. I mean, it doesn't matter where we go. There's always somebody who will stop and stare, point a finger.
His son, Travis, now 33 years old, was found guilty on 2 charges. Travis did not want to be interviewed. His dad still defends him. Ron, did you ever ask your son if anything happened?
No, I didn't have to. I knew he didn't do anything. And I know my family did nothing wrong. How do I prove it? I can't. You're just going to have to believe me.
John Popowich can never escape the memories of Martinsville. He was the Saskatoon police officer who 10 years ago was named as a child abuser.
Thank you, Sarah, for continuing to listen.
Once you're fingered for as a sexual pervert or predator of any kind, anything to do with kids and sexual assaults, you're dust. Doesn't matter what happens. As soon as you got that label, you're dust.
He'll never forget the day he was on duty at the police station and was suddenly called upstairs. It was the worst day of his life. Look at this interrogation again. What you're watching is an innocent man caught in a trap.
I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you. Don't you threaten me. And don't tell me that I'm involved in Martinsville.
First he denies, then the futility sinks in.
It's not there. I've often wondered about people being accused of something they never done. Terry, there's nothing there. I've never done anything like that.
And the full horror hits him.
Not Terry, I gotta. You okay? Oh, I'm not. I gotta phone him. Okay. 6:30. Terry, I'm gonna lose my 2 kids.
I'm sorry, y'all. That's hard to watch. He does seem like an innocent person. I really don't think that he had anything to do with this. And I think they found, like I said, that he didn't.
Sorry, guys.
The images are too painful, even today.
I tried to explain to Terry that as one policeman to another, I wasn't there, didn't do anything. And then when you feel the gates of hell closing in around you, you explain what you can, how you can. And if you get emotional, which I obviously did, you're fighting for your life.
John Popowich is closer than ever to his 2 grown-up daughters. 10 years ago, they were just kids, and he was afraid to even hold them.
You'd sit there and watch TV in the afternoon or at night, and you'd turn the Venetians right down so nobody could see in. I was so scared of people watching or listening that the girls weren't even allowed to sit on my knee to watch TV like we normally did.
Your own daughters?
No, that wasn't allowed. They weren't even, like, I wouldn't even allow them to sit in the same couch as me. I was scared.
His family stuck by him as he went to court and the case against him dissolved.
That's crazy to be that afraid of having your own children around you.
But he ended up in hospital with a breakdown.
I'm going to be on medication for the rest of my life. I will never be able to lead a normal life like you can or anybody else. Come and go as they please. I still got to watch where I go. I still got to watch what I do. And there's still a lot of people out there who point fingers and say I'm guilty.
Just as raw are the feelings of the Martinsville families, whose children were dragged first through the investigation and then through the courts. Even though the justice system has determined most of the abuse never happened, they still believe it did. Is it possible that the case didn't hold up, that the people charged, in fact, were not guilty?
No. That's not even a possibility.
Has that ever crossed your mind, even in the 10 years since Martinsville?
No. No.
What about in your son's mind? Has he changed his thinking in any way about what happened?
Not at all. He is still just as angry and upset to this day. This wasn't just a one-day thing or a one-month thing. I mean, we suffered for many years over this. And has it gone away today? No. And no matter how hard you try to block it out.
See, that's hard because now we know that the children are still suffering mentally.
And forget about it. It never goes away.
In a way, perhaps, the kids became victims of the investigation itself. According to one expert, repeated interviews designed to get at the truth may have in fact altered the truth, at least in the children's minds. Dr. David Raskin.
When someone has no memory of an event because it didn't occur, then it is much easier to suggest to them that something happened, even if it didn't, and for them to accept that suggestion. And the weaker the memory and the longer the passage of the time, the more easily one can accept as fact something that may never have happened. And that is what very likely happened in this case.
This is a situation that requires healing, and damn it all, if that requires an apology, then somebody should apologize. It sounds to me like a pretty good idea. If I were there, I'd want to do that.
Would you apologize?
If I were there, I'd.
No, you have an opportunity.
Oh yeah, I apologize. Sure. I mean, I just feel sorry for everybody. And if I could contribute to that healing by saying, I really am sorry, then I want to do that.
Do you accept the responsibility for the...
I was the minister. I have to accept the responsibility for the whole damn thing, even though as I've tried to explain to you, these are not loops in which the minister can ever be found to be operating. And yet the system requires that I bear responsibility for it, so I do. And that's that.
The Saskatchewan government is now being held to account for the mistakes of Martinsville. It's being sued for malicious prosecution, which until recently it stubbornly fought on all fronts.
Last summer, the province finally settled with John Popowich for $1.3 million.
Thank you.
The man who gave him the check was former Justice Minister Chris Axworthy.
We apologize to Mr. Popovich for the effect that this has had on his life, and we did that because we knew it was the right thing to do.
And are there others who deserve the same apology, the same
Well, we'll wait and
package?
see what the settlement arrangements, if indeed settlements are arranged with other.
Do you expect they will be?
Well, I'm not privy to the details of the discussions between lawyers on behalf of the province and lawyers on behalf of the.
I think they should apologize to everybody, and their jobs should be taken into account, and whether they still need those jobs.
Complainants, but we'll have to wait and see how that
Right,
ends up.
Sarah?
John Popowich would like to forget most of what happened in Martinsville, but he keeps one memento proudly displayed. It's a framed copy of what Justice Ted Noble said to him when his trial abruptly collapsed.
But the one part is you have, sir, unfortunately been mistakenly identified. The fact that you were mistakenly identified as one of the accused in such a high-profile case as this should be a grim reminder to all members of society that it can happen to anyone. Good luck.
So that was the Martinsville case, and we touched on Satanic Panic. We caught up on Delphi, and we saw where the West Memphis 3 are now. That's going to be it for me today. I do want to thank you all so very much for being here. I want to ask you to please hit the like button so more people can get to know who we are. Tomorrow, we will go over what happened today with Delphi, and I don't know what else we will do. We'll probably come for the same time since everybody, well, not everybody, but there was people here. And I don't know what we'll talk about, but we'll talk about something interesting. It was really good to see you guys, and I really thank you for being here in the comment section. I like watching y'all talk. It makes me happy to see what you guys have to say. Anybody that's not feeling good, I hope that you do feel better. I hope that you all have the best day ever, and I will definitely see you tomorrow. I don't know what we'll talk about yet, but we'll find out later tonight when I post the thumbnail. Have the best day ever, and thank you so much. Bye.